The story begins with a lone adventurer who had broken a taboo. This adventurer ate like an animal. Several monsters lay scattered on the ground, and a young man stood atop them. His arm was completely wounded. He stopped eating, and a light began to envelop his body. Quickly, all the wounds on his body began to heal. A system notified him that he had acquired some skills, like roar and battle axe. Our protagonist began to scream as a strong aura took over the place. Other creatures were nearby, watching everything unfold. A noble journal stated that devouring monsters was a major taboo in that world. The monsters began to surround the young man. Devouring monsters meant absorbing their evil essence. The first symptom of this was an uncontrollable feeling of rage, along with superhuman strength. The second symptom was intense headaches and nausea, followed by poisoning. More monsters appeared, but the young man showed no fear. The third symptom was sudden death. As the monsters attacked him, the protagonist could only think about getting revenge for everything. Rage consumed his eyes and his emotions. If someone could endure all of this, they could become a monster after consuming the evil essence. The young man began defeating all the creatures as if they were nothing. He kept attacking, fighting, and devouring everything that moved around him, gaining more and more skills. This cycle repeated several times. After defeating everything in his path, the protagonist encountered a massive serpent. Driven by rage and armed with many skills, he began a fierce battle against the serpent. It tried to bite him, but he managed to defend himself and quickly used his lightning skill called Thunder Cloak. A massive electric shock hit the serpent, which couldn't withstand such a powerful blow. The boy gained another skill called Poison Mist. He continued defeating and devouring monsters, growing stronger and stronger. Tired of so much fighting, he paused for a moment and thought that maybe with all of this he could survive. But then he heard a sound, and when he looked up, he couldn't believe what he saw. Several more creatures appeared before him. This time, he was surrounded by many monsters. He looked at them all and said that no matter how many he had to defeat, he would survive at any cost. This is the future of the protagonist, the adventurer who devours monsters. Currently in Bologna, a city on the border with several dungeons, there is one called the Mist Dungeon. The air inside this dungeon weakens the stats of adventurers who visit it. The protagonist walked through it thinking that others hated that place, but he always returned there. Before he knew it, he was already being called the Butcher of the Mist. He looked at the ground and was happy to see plenty of grass. That was the 6th floor of the dungeon. He began harvesting the plants. Those were the mist herbs. They have the effect of purifying the dungeon and are also a source of income for the protagonist. He started collecting some, thinking he'd only take what was necessary. After harvesting, he left happily, believing that would last him about 3 days. Suddenly, he heard noises and turned around to see a group of rats. He figured they were dungeon rats. The young man ran toward them. Many of the monsters there use poison as an attack, which makes adventurers hate that place. But for him, that didn't make a difference. The protagonist crossed the poison curtain and jumped straight at the rats. He defeated all the rats with ease, but more suddenly appeared, leaping toward him. He didn't waste time and counterattacked, defeating another rat. However, one was already too close, and he could only block with his arm as the rat tried to bite him. The rat was about to wound the protagonist, but at the last second, he heard someone shout. A fireball hit the rat, throwing the boy to the side. He hit the ground and stared at the explosion, surprised by everything. Looking to the side, he saw some people saying they had missed the target. An adventurer told the younger one that he had already warned him to get closer before attacking. The protagonist wasn't pleased to see familiar faces from the Adventurers Guild. One of the boys approached and apologized, asking if his name was Rude. He explained that he only wanted to help, since it looked like Rude was in danger. Rude got up, thanked him, and asked to be warned before doing something like that again. The boy looked confused and said that's exactly what he did when he shouted fireball. As they talked, the chubbier one shouted, saying the herb field was right there. He smiled, saying it was just too lucky. The other two were happy about the news, but the protagonist was shocked. He asked if the 3 of them were following him to find out his gathering spot. The boy asked what he was talking about, saying they were just adventurers trying to make a living in the dungeon. He said it was just a coincidence that they ran into Rude and even saved him. They shouted that it was to be expected from the Butcher of the Mist. He couldn't simply thank them. The 3 began to prepare for a fight. Rude noticed this and closed his eyes. Even though he was angry, he began to apologize for doubting them and thanked them for saving his life. His hand was trembling with rage. The scene shifts to some time later in Bologna, at Rude's base. The protagonist was thrown onto the tables. 2 men cursed at him, saying that every time he entered the place the smell ruined their food, and they had to say it because he was too dumb to notice on his own. Rude was lying on the floor as the 2 continued mocking him. The blonde man said that adventurers are people with skills to defeat monsters. They started laughing, saying that someone with a useless skill like abnormal status nullification was good for nothing. The protagonist looked at them with disgust for everything they said. Abnormal status nullification is Rude's unique skill. It's useful for exploring the Mist Dungeon, but not for defeating monsters, which is essential for any adventurer. And since he has no combat skills, Rude is not accepted in any party. Because of that, he earned the nickname Butcher of the Mist, as he lives on the lower floors scavenging for items. Rude left the tavern because, thanks to that weak skill, he became a renegade adventurer. The protagonist thought that even as an adult man, he still had life or death battles against mere rats. Lying on the bed and lost in thought, he wondered if he would spend his whole life as just the Butcher of the Mist. The next day at the Adventurers Guild, Rude opens the door thinking he needs to find another colony while he still has a little money. As he walks through the place, he notices it's noisier than usual. He goes to the receptionist and asks if there's any good quest today. With a disheartened look, she says they discovered a new dungeon. Rude is a bit shocked by the news, since new dungeons are full of treasures and magical items. It's a big opportunity for any adventurer. He looks around and understands why there are so many people there. The receptionist calls him and shows that the herbs he used to bring now only sell for 30 because the price dropped. He looks and yells at her, asking why. She explains that the Miasma dungeon was never popular, and now that everyone is focused on the new one, no one wants those herbs anymore. The protagonist can't believe it. The woman also says that the new dungeon is in the Avelio Mountains, but Rude can't go there. He asks why. She shows that the requirement to enter is to be rank D or higher, and since Rude is rank E, he doesn't qualify. This frustrates him. He yells at her, saying he at least wants to take a look at the dungeon and asks if there's nothing he can do. The girl sighs and says, unfortunately, those are the rules, and that even if he went, he'd only find death. Even so, Rude gets irritated. Suddenly, someone appears and says that if he wants to go so badly, he can join the group as a porter. The boy looks at him with a smile on his face. After everything is settled, they take a wagon down the road. The group leader smiles and says it's great they found the protagonist, since he was looking for someone to carry the dungeon loot and no one wanted to do it. Rude looks at him disheartened, thinking that it's because all the adventurers at the guild are busy with the new dungeon and no one wants to be a porter. Suddenly, the redhead starts questioning if it really had to be the butcher. The man agrees with her, asking if there wasn't anyone better. The leader tells everyone to stop and says the protagonist is an experienced adventurer, so it's better to take him than a newbie. He introduces himself, saying his name is Bear, and that he's the leader of the Scarlet Blades. Bear also introduces the other two, saying they are Sasha and Rick. Together, the three form a rank D party. The protagonist looks at them and also introduces himself, saying his name is Rude, rank E. He says it's a pleasure to work with all of them. Bear says that before they enter, he'd like to take a close look at the protagonist's stats and asks him to show his guild card. Rude says it's no problem. As soon as he takes out the card, Bear asks him to open his stats, and a window showing the information appears. Bear is surprised and asks if Rude knows how to use fire magic. Rude says he does, but it's too weak to use in battle, though it's good for cooking. Bear smiles and says that's actually pretty useful, so they'll count on him. After the journey, they arrive at the dungeon and are impressed. The leader says they finally arrived. This is Avalio's new dungeon. Sasha is very happy, and Rick is excited. She says it looks like they were the first to arrive. Rick can barely wait and asks if they can start exploring already. Slowly, they open the door and start looking around. But as soon as they look, they see several people inside. In front, there were people. To the right, there were people. To the left, there were people. Everywhere they looked, there were more and more people. Sasha shouts that there are adventurers everywhere. Bear looks around and says it seems the first floor has already been explored. Sasha continues annoyed, saying that in the end, they weren't the first to arrive. Rick says it's easy to fix. They just need to go a bit deeper, since there must be fewer people down there. She cheers up and says he's right. Rude says it's not a good idea, since this dungeon was just discovered and they should first map the first floor. But they look at him, and she asks if the porter is giving his opinion now. Rick says that's why he's still rank E. Bear tells the two to stop, pointing out that the protagonist didn't mean it in a bad way. He says that even so, he agrees with the others, because if they keep going like this, they won't get good results. They look at the stairs down, saying they need to hurry. With that, they begin descending and arrive at the fourth floor. A wolf charges at them, and the protagonist gets scared. But Rick jumps into action and defeats the wolf. He turns to the protagonist and tells him to stop being afraid of such weaklings. Sasha shows no mercy and uses her magic to defeat the creatures. Bear takes down everything that comes near him. Rude watches the three, impressed by their strength. He tries to grab his sword but can barely move from fear. Before he could do anything, all the monsters had already been defeated. The leader sheathes his sword and sighs in relief. Sasha is happy with the rewards, saying they made the right call going down since it's great without the others around. Bear looks at his ring and says the monsters here aren't that strong, but they can still find good treasures. Suddenly, Rick yells at the protagonist, telling him to gather the materials from the monsters he defeated too. Rude says he can't get the materials because the monsters are too damaged, even the magic stones. Rick asks how he knows that if he didn't even look, and tells Rude to stop being a lazy butcher. The protagonist gets irritated, remembering how Rick's been acting, and even with his hand trembling in anger, he says he'll do it. Rude approaches one of the monsters, thinking it was really damaged and smelled awful. He wonders if Rick really had to take it that far. The protagonist uses his fire magic and wonders if it wouldn't be easier to burn it a little. Rick keeps mocking, saying Rude started roasting the monster and asking if he's really going to eat it. Suddenly, he says they've been exploring for a while and he's starving. The monsters actually look kind of tasty. Sasha tells him to stop because that's disgusting. She says it's a taboo for adventurers to eat monsters because they absorb their mana, and no one knows what could happen. Rick says it was just a joke, and that he's going to eat a lot with the money they've earned. Suddenly, a pressure with a loud sound fills the area, leaving everyone startled. Right in front of the four, a giant monster appears. It's a minotaur. Rude gets worried because it's a rank B monster and shouldn't be on this floor. They start yelling that they won't be able to win and ask what to do. Bayer yells at the protagonist, saying he'll use the items and asks for the bag. He grabs the bag and tells Rude to keep an eye on the monster's movements. The protagonist asks if the leader has a plan. Bayer starts laughing and says he does, preparing an attack. He claims he has a great plan. Bayer betrays the protagonist and strikes him. While Rude is on the ground, the leader calls the other two. Rick throws a spear called Warrior's Cloak. This is a skill that makes the target draw the monster's attention. The spear lands next to the protagonist. Sasha uses acceleration on everyone. This skill doubles the speed of those who receive it. Lying almost powerless on the ground, Rude asks if all of this was planned from the beginning. The leader smiles and asks if there could be any other reason to bring a butcher with them. The protagonist looks at them running and yelling for him to buy them some time. Overcome with rage, he screams and curses everyone. The Minotaur gets ready to attack. The protagonist looks at him, and the monster stares back. With all its strength, it attacks and throws Rude far away. He hits the wall and smiles, thinking he managed to dodge. But he sees the monster approaching and thinks it's the end. The Minotaur strikes with full force, and he feels unbearable pain. The wall behind him shatters from the impact, and the two crash through to the other side. The monster is also surprised to see that they're falling into a massive pit. After the fall, Rude opens his eyes, all bruised and confused. He wonders if he's still alive. He looks to the side and sees that he landed on top of the monster. The protagonist thinks he doesn't have much time even so, because even if no monster shows up, he's too injured to get out of there. Hunger begins to take over his body. He needs to eat something. Still on top of the Minotaur, he gets lost in thought and swallows dry, his mouth filling with saliva. He starts laughing, wondering what he's thinking, since eating monsters can only end badly. Rude closes his eyes, thinking how terrible his life has been. But then he begins to see a light and someone speaking to him. The person says that no matter how hard life gets, he must never give up. Without hesitation, he starts eating the monster piece by piece. He thinks that if a human without magic eats monster meat filled with mana, the particles will invade the body and cause monstrous transformation. The protagonist thinks that fate is worse than dying from poison. His eyes start to change color, and a dense aura begins to envelop his body, but he doesn't stop. He keeps slicing the monster's flesh. His arm is completely destroyed. That's why this is a taboo. To heal and satisfy his hunger, Rude gambled big and ended up undergoing an unexpected mutation. In the dungeon's hallways, a sound begins to echo. The sleeping monsters wake up and see something terrifying moving among them. Something that shouldn't be there. Rude is walking like a ghost. His eyes glow and rage has taken over his body. The bats try to attack, but he uses roar to intimidate them with a loud scream. The bats don't stand a chance, but more appear. This time, the protagonist uses Physical Boost, a skill that temporarily increases strength. He starts destroying everything that gets close. Consumed by rage and hunger, he defeats all the monsters and keeps eating them one by one. Now Rude has the skill echolocation. With it, he can detect nearby creatures, and it works well in the dark. Many other monsters of all kinds begin to approach, but now the protagonist can hear and locate every one of them. He's surprised to realize they're coming in hordes. This excites Rude, eager to see who will end up leading whom. The protagonist charges at the monsters, taking down everything around him. He grips the axe tightly, thinking it fits perfectly in his hand, and now he can sense the monsters without using magic. Rude continues the battle without pause, and everything he can eat, he devours without a second thought. After the fight, the protagonist is panting and begins to laugh. His clothes and wounds begin to heal immediately. He thinks that every time he eats a monster, he feels the power coursing through his body. Thirsty for more power, he continues the hunt, destroying any monster in his way with a smile on his face. After fighting and walking for a long time, he opens the door and begins to exit. Upon seeing the sunlight, he freezes and lets the axe fall, smiling because he finally made it back. Rude shouts joyfully for having survived. Meanwhile, at the Adventurers Guild, people are talking anxiously among themselves. The Scarlet Blades group is delivering the report. An old man says that after hearing the report, he decided to gather all the adventurers who were in the dungeon, except Rude, who was with the other three. This man is the Guild Master of Blona, and his name is Lancast. Bayer pretends to be sad and says that as soon as they encountered a minotaur on the 4th floor, Rude was attacked before they could do anything. Sasha also pretends to cry and says that if they had seen the monster earlier, they could have done something, and Lancast says he understands the situation. He then declares that from now on, entry to the dungeon is prohibited. The receptionist is saddened but quickly becomes surprised by what she sees before her eyes. The protagonist opens the door, leaving everyone there in shock. People begin asking what happened. The 3 members of the Scarlet Blades and the Guild Master are completely shocked. Bayer runs over and shouts Rude's name, happy that he's alive, but he leans in close to the protagonist's ear and says that if he says anything, he won't be so lucky next time. The others arrive and ask if he's okay, saying they tried to come back and help, but the dungeon was sealed. They touch the protagonist, but he remains silent. Bayer yells that it doesn't matter how, what matters is that Rude is fine, and that deserves a celebration, but it can't be here. Bayer tries to push the protagonist, but is surprised to realize he can't move him. Rude shouts that the 3 of them used him as bait. Everyone is shocked by this. Bayer tries to dodge the topic and asks what he's talking about. The Guild Master asks what the protagonist meant by bait. Rude starts to explain that Bayer stole the supplies and attacked him from behind. Rick used a skill to lure the Minotaur toward the protagonist, while Sasha used acceleration to escape, leaving him behind. Bayer shouts, trying to deny it. Suddenly, a woman enters the guild saying they're going to clarify the story. Everyone watches as she enters the building because she is an officer from the Department of Truth. The 3 are shocked and ask what a truth officer is doing there. Lenker says it's because many porters who joined their group were never seen again, so he called her to settle the matter. The guild master tells her to proceed, and everyone is nervous except the protagonist. She asks, between Bayer's group and Rude's, who is telling the truth. Her eyes begin to glow, and seconds later she declares that the members of the Scarlet Blades are lying. The woman raises her staff and announces that Rude is telling the truth. Bayer is terrified by this. The other adventurers start whispering in outrage. Despite everything, Bayer refuses to accept it and asks how they can know. Lanker explains that the truth ability is impossible to acquire after adulthood, and its effectiveness is comparable to unique skills. Lies cannot pass through the truth ability. The guild master asks what could be more reliable than the words of someone who swore to dedicate all their power to the nation, and Bayer is left speechless, trembling with fear. Lanker yells that abandoning companions is a taboo for adventurers. On top of that, the 3 injured their comrade and used him as bait to escape. Lanker says that even without investigating other crimes, that alone is enough to revoke the trio's licenses and turn them into servants. Sasha starts screaming in outrage. Rick can't believe what he's hearing. Bayer begins trembling with anger, never imagining that someone like him would end up as a mere servant. He looks at the young woman beside him, furious, thinking that if it weren't for her, consumed by rage, he attacks the girl. The guild master and the protagonist see it happen. The young woman is startled. Without thinking twice, Rude moves quickly and steps in front of her, shielding her from the attack. The protagonist looks directly at Bayer and tells him never to touch a truth officer again. Bayer is shocked by the protagonist's strength and speed. Rude lands a blow that sends him flying several meters away. Bayer crashes into the wall with such force that it breaks, catching the attention of everyone passing by. Sasha and Rick are frozen in fear at the sight. Rude says that wasn't cool at all. Once everything calms down, Lanker takes the protagonist to the guest room and apologizes for the trouble, saying he must be tired. Rude says it's fine and asks what happened to the 3. Lanker explains that the 3 were captured by his team and are now being interrogated. If it's confirmed they used other porters as bait, they'll lose everything and become servants. But Bayer went too far by trying to attack a truth officer, and it's likely he'll never be seen again. The protagonist is shocked by this. Lanker says the 3 have lost the right to the dungeon's profits, so Rude will get everything. The guild master says there's about 200,000 Regan in total. After they finish talking, the protagonist leaves the room and stands in front of the door holding all the money in his hands. Rude hugs the money, happy knowing it'll cover some expenses. He thinks it would have taken him a long time to save up this much bit by bit. Rude never imagined he could earn this much as an adventurer. He starts walking and notices something strange. The protagonist thinks that everyone has stopped insulting him because of what happened, but that doesn't mean they'll be kind. He keeps walking, thinking that if he keeps evolving like this, people will start to get suspicious of him. So he decides to try his luck in the mist once again, just like before. The protagonist takes a deep breath and thinks it's time to act and stop being negative, because now he has good money and can buy equipment and eat whatever he wants. While walking through the village, he decides to take a look at the tool shop. Suddenly, Rude is impressed by something. A beautiful magic bag catches his attention. He keeps walking, saying he's going to look for something to eat. The next day, inside the dungeon, the monsters were being defeated with ease. Rude never imagined he'd be able to beat them so effortlessly. After all, just yesterday he would have been running away. The protagonist used his analysis skill, and his eyes began to glow as he saw the details of the rat's status. Rude realized he gained that skill after eating the monster. He kept observing the rats and thought they were only level 9, so he got curious about how much his own stats had increased. He took out his guild card. Since he had defeated the rats so easily, he figured he should already be around level 20. When he opened the status window, he was shocked to see that his current level was 42, considering that just yesterday he was at level 7. Rude remarked that this was rare and decided to check his skills. When he opened the status window again, he was pleased to see he had several new abilities. He remembered that when he passed by the place where he had fallen in the dungeon, the wall had already been sealed. The new dungeon would stay closed for a while, so Rude decided to explore the mist. Confident, he wanted to test his new skills on deeper floors. He also wanted to test the new bag he had bought earlier. Rude headed to the staircase, saying he wanted to pick the right monster to test his skills on. He started descending, passing through the 6th floor, then the 9th, and the 13th. But he found it all boring and thought he needed to go deeper. After a while, the protagonist reached the 24th floor, where he encountered a monster with armor and a sword. Rude hid behind a rock and used his analysis skill. Seeing that the monster was only level 25, the protagonist commented that lizard soldiers usually fight in groups, but this one was alone. He looked at the sword, smiled, and said it was worth a shot. Rude attacked, and the lizard noticed his movements. It tried to dodge, but the protagonist's strike still hit it lightly. Rude smiled and said that wasn't bad, but next time he wouldn't miss. The lizard ran off, leaving the protagonist confused. Rude chased after it, yelling for it to wait. He was a bit puzzled because the monster went into a dead end. The protagonist approached, saying now it wouldn't escape. The lizard turned with a smile and stared at the protagonist. Rude noticed other presences behind him. He turned slowly and saw 2 more lizards. Soon the protagonist realized it was a trap. He kept his eyes on the lizards and prepared for battle, thinking he was completely surrounded. Even with the level difference, the situation still looked bad. One of the lizards attacked, but Rude dodged, thinking he'd have to take them down one by one. He rushed in and struck one of the lizards, shouting that it was time to have some fun. His strength was great, and he managed to knock the lizard down, who only looked at the next blow. Rude got ready, thinking he would end it now, but another lizard stepped in to protect its companion. The protagonist was confused by this behavior. He realized the other one was attacking from behind and managed to dodge at the last second. The lizard watched him as Rude smiled and said that was a close one. More lizards began to appear, and the protagonist wondered how many more were coming. Rude thought that even though they were fighting well together, how did they manage to set up the ambush and coordinate attacks so well? Then remembered that before they acted, he heard a sharp sound that could only mean one thing. Looking back, the protagonist spotted the leader coordinating all the lizard's attacks. He quickly used his analysis skill and focused directly on the boss. Its level was higher than the others, and one of its skills was command. Rude began to laugh, thinking he finally found who was in control. The boss realized it had been discovered and started shouting. The other lizards shouted too, and 3 of them attacked at once. Rude used physical boost and gathered his strength to strike back. He defeated everyone in his path. A lizard appeared in front of him, but the protagonist ignored it and simply trampled over it. He jumped over all the lizards, going straight for the leader. The boss stood still, watching as the protagonist charged, thinking he had finally caught him. Rude landed a full strike, but was surprised by what happened. The leader didn't have a single scratch on him. The boss noticed that the protagonist had lowered his guard, grabbed his sword, and charged in for the attack. Rude thought he wouldn't be able to dodge, but when the blow landed, nothing happened because he had activated the Iron Body skill. The protagonist laughed and told the boss that he wasn't the only one with a card up his sleeve. The leader backed off, and Rude took the chance to analyze the situation, confused by what had happened, since he thought he had hit the boss but caused no damage. After analyzing, Rude confirmed that the leader didn't have any resistance skills, so it must have been another lizard. He checked everyone around but didn't find any special abilities. Suddenly, he found it. One of the lizards was injured, and one of its skills was substitution. Rude figured that was the lizard receiving all the damage. The lizard realized it had been discovered, but it was too late. Rude managed to hit it. The protagonist commented that it must be hard being the underling who's just there to take the hits. The lizard began to tremble and collapsed to the ground. As it fell, Rude said not to take it personally. Seeing that, the boss was furious and started screaming. All the lizards attacked at once, but the protagonist used the web manipulation skill and managed to dodge all the attacks. The leader watched in disbelief. From above, Rude said that since they were all together, it made it easier to use his webs. then created a net and threw it over them. The boss just watched, unmoving. All the lizards were defeated, and the leader fell as well. The protagonist approached and said it looked like he had won, then finished the battle with a firm strike. With the leader's defeat, all the others were defeated too. The protagonist stood among them and said it was time to eat. Rude grabbed his bag and said it was time to use the magic bag. The space inside expanded with magic, and the weight disappeared as soon as he closed it. He began searching for cooking utensils inside the bag. Rude pulled out a pot, a cutting board, and some spices. While preparing the food, he thought about how he used to fight just to survive, but had always wanted to try things like this. The protagonist started cooking, wondering what monster meat would be like, and when he finished, he looked at the plate, mouth-watering, thinking that cooking and eating was a great experience. Eager to try it, he took a piece and began to eat. Rude was surprised by the flavor. It was delicious. He kept eating, not expecting it to be that good. While eating, he realized he had gained new skills. He wondered why it tasted so good, and if it was because of the magical particles. Since the skills from the Minotaur, the spider armor, and the evil eye had all been very useful. But there were still other abilities he hadn't tested, like the lightning wolf's and the black serpent's poison. Once he finished eating, Rude stood up excitedly, thinking he'd eat more on the way back. He looked to the side and saw the lizard with the substitution skill still there. Some time later, on the 21st floor, other types of monsters appeared. The protagonist launched the attack using the Thunder Cloak skill and defeated them all at once. The monsters fell to the ground, and he thought that skill was incredible too. Rude commented that those monsters caused strange effects, but they'd picked the wrong enemy. The protagonist smiled and grabbed his pot, saying today's meal would be frog meat with bugs. He prepared fried charon. While eating, he thought that the frog meat was as soft as a mushroom. New skills were acquired. Suddenly, he heard a noise. The protagonist hesitated, since it sounded like banging and human voices. He was glad to know there were adventurers who had made it this far. Rude started packing his things and thanked the monsters for the meal. He ran off, thinking it was rare to see other groups in combat, but maybe he could get some information. His sword was dirty, and a girl was injured on the ground, surrounded by several men. She groaned in pain from the wounds. One of the men said the attack hurt because he didn't expect the girl to still have so much magic left. The leader approached and said the trouble she caused would be worth it. He pulled back her hood and revealed she was an elf. The girl was terrified and couldn't say anything. The men started laughing, wondering how much she'd be worth. Suddenly, Rude appeared, saying he had hoped to find friendly adventurers. The leader and the others turned around surprised. The protagonist walked up to them, saying he didn't know what was going on, but he couldn't just stand by and watch a girl being attacked. The leader asked who he was. Rude smiled and said he was just an adventurer, still considered rank E. The elf shouted for him to run, warning that those men hunted adventurers. Rude thought he had heard of that before. He knew they were high level and used his eye to analyze them, but he could only see their levels because their stats were hidden. That applied to all of them. Rude was surprised, wondering if they had some kind of camouflage skill or magical item. The leader ordered the others to capture Rude, and a drunk man charged at him. Rude was impressed by the man's speed, but managed to defend himself. The man said he wasn't bad. Rude smiled and replied that actually, the drunk was just weak. That enraged the man, who shouted that he wasn't weak. The others watched the fight between the two. When the blonde man let his guard down, Rude used his poison skill and hit the drunk's face. The man screamed in pain. The others looked at Xerius, who had fallen to the ground, and asked if Rude had spit poison at him. The group stared at Rude, thinking he was a monster. Rude reflected that this was a reckless way to fight and not how an adventurer should act, but it was the only way he knew. The leader observed the scene, wondering if that was really a poison ability. They realized they couldn't underestimate him. He ordered the other two to attack together. The two charged first, and Rude dodged the first strike, thinking that if he paused for even a second, it would be over. The long-haired man attacked next, but Rude dodged again. Suddenly, he noticed a foot coming toward him. The leader was in front of him, ready to attack. With no time to escape, he activated his iron body skill. The captain landed a kick and launched Rude into a green slime. The captain thought Rude must be very tough. Rude began to get up, and the blonde man said this would end now. The protagonist stood and began running toward the slime pit, but the man shouted at him to stop running. Rude started entering the slime, and the leader told him to stop, explaining that it was a poisonous swamp and if he went deeper, he wouldn't come out alive. Rude kept moving forward, while the leader said he wouldn't last and would have to retreat soon. The protagonist looked at them and wondered how much longer they'd stay there, because it seemed he'd need to fight seriously. He said he was lucky to have fallen into the swamp, because besides the miasma, the swamp's vapor would reduce the stats of the three. They started feeling the effects, and the long-haired man asked how long Rude planned to stay in the swamp. The masked man answered that 10 minutes had passed, and that he wasn't doing well. Rude thought it was time to act. He wanted to weaken them more, but if he waited any longer, it would only cause more suffering for the wounded elf. Rude approached and said that the effects of miasma poison could be harsh. The two asked if he was giving up, since he had caused so much trouble. Rude replied that unfortunately, he was immune to abnormal status effects, so he had no idea what they were feeling. The captain grew furious, realizing he had been tricked. Filled with rage, he shouted for his men to grab the protagonist immediately. The masked man looked at Rude and charged without hesitation, but the protagonist easily blocked the attack. The man began to grow weaker. Rude said that the poison drains stamina, and the miasma reduces stats. Suddenly, Rude noticed the other man attacking from the side. He activated his iron body skill, and the attack caused no damage at all. The long-haired man was confused by that, and taking advantage of the fact the two were close to him, Rude used his lightning cloak skill. A powerful electric shock struck them both at the same time. The masked man and the long-haired one were wounded, but didn't give up and cursed at Rude. But Rude activated his air blade skill, and several wind blades struck the bandits. The captain watched everything happen, thinking to himself that Rude had poison, iron body, lightning cloak, and even air blade. He wondered why a human had so many monster-like abilities. Rude charged forward, saying that didn't matter. The two began an intense fight. The captain thought to himself that even though he was superior in close combat, he was starting to lose the fight, probably because of the miasma. Rude kept advancing and attacking. With no other option, the captain used his agility boost, saying he had to use it against trash like him. He attacked with everything he had. Rude locked eyes on the captain and activated his physical boost, breaking the leader's sword and winning the tough battle. The protagonist said that if it weren't for the abnormal statuses, the captain would have been much stronger than him. After the fight, the two begin to walk. The elf thanks him for saving her, saying she doesn't know what would have happened if he hadn't shown up. Rude says he couldn't leave her in that situation. He thinks to himself that the elf is trying to stay composed, but her body is clearly affected by the miasma. He says he did what he could to give her first aid. He starts thinking that it's rare to see an elf in such a remote area and wonders why she was being hunted by those men. Suddenly, they hear a loud noise. A massive monster appears before them. Rude thinks it must be the moth leader and uses his eye to analyze it. He sees the monster is level 37. Without thinking twice, he jumps in to attack, believing the monster won't be able to defeat him. However, the monster uses its skill, and there's no time for Rude to react. The attack is fierce, cracking the ground and nearly hitting the elf, who barely dodges. Rude asks if she's okay, and the elf responds yes. He gets ready, saying he was caught off guard, but now he'll fight back. The moth starts flying, and Rude asks if it really thinks running will save it. He uses his air blade skill, hitting the monster directly. The monster is seriously wounded, which only makes it angrier. It uses its paralyzing scales, but Rude smiles and says that doesn't work on him. However, he realizes the attack is also heading toward the elf. She focuses and releases a powerful gust of wind, leaving the monster nearly defeated. Rude is impressed, but that was expected of an elf. He walks up to the monster and finishes it off. The elf looks at him and asks if he's really immune to poison and paralysis. She also says his abilities are similar to those of monsters. Rude wonders how to explain that, but the elf suddenly begins to feel sick and falls to her knees. Rude becomes worried and shouts, asking if she was hit by the paralyzing scales. Breathing heavily, the elf says it's something else. He kneels beside her, and she says that once they get out of there, she'll explain everything. They begin moving toward the exit, and once outside, they sit under a tree. The elf smiles in relief, saying she feels much better now that she's out of the labyrinth. Before telling him everything, she decides to introduce herself, saying she's a former adventurer named Alicia. Rude is surprised and exclaims, asking if she's Alicia of the Emerald Storm. She smiles, saying that he already knows her. The protagonist says she's from the most renowned S-rank team, the Blue Rails. Everyone knows the members of that team, but as far as he remembers, the team was defeated. Alicia lowers her head and confirms, saying it's been 5 years. They were defeated by monsters that day. They faced a monster inside an S-rank labyrinth called the Abyss Labyrinth. During the battle, they lost their leader, and another member had to retreat due to severe injuries. One more was devoured by the labyrinth. The elf says that not even she escaped unharmed. She starts to show more of her scars. Rude is startled and asks what she's doing. She explains that the mark is a curse that was placed on her that day, a low-level curse. The protagonist is surprised, saying he's never heard of that. Alicia says she didn't know about it either. She explains that she tried everything but was only able to slow the curse's progression. Those hunters found out about the curse and tried to exploit it for profit. Alicia explains that either way, she would meet her end once her level reached 0. Even knowing that, she couldn't bear the thought of surrendering to those scumbags. Rude listens intently and suddenly realizes something. He says maybe he can help her with that. Rude thinks about his substitution skill, which allows him to switch places with someone and take all the damage and negative effects. He says he wants to try something. The protagonist asks if she would accept the skill he's about to activate, which leaves the elf confused. However, she ends up accepting. The two stand up, and he touches her shoulder, activating his substitution skill. Suddenly, the curse mark begins to spread across Rude's arm, leaving Alicia paralyzed. She wonders if the curse is really transferring to him. Alicia realizes it is and shouts for him to stop, saying that if he keeps going, he'll be affected by the curse. With a smile on his face, Rude says it's okay and asks her to trust him. A dense aura forms behind the protagonist, taking the shape of a monster. Alicia watches in fear. A curse is entering his body. As soon as Rude absorbs all of the curse, his unique ability is activated, Abnormal Status Nullification. A bright light fills the area, and the curse begins to be completely destroyed. Rude looks at his hand, thinking it seems to have worked. The elf, still confused, asks what that was, but the protagonist simply tells her to look at her guild card. When she checks, her status is normal. The curse was really destroyed. She can't believe the curse was broken. Rude says his unique ability is Abnormal Status Nullification. He figured that by taking the curse upon himself, he could destroy it. Alicia asks if he's an idiot, saying he shouldn't take such a risk for a complete stranger. With tears in her eyes, she smiles in relief and thanks him for saving her life. Rude looks at her and tries to comfort her, saying he'll always help anyone in need. Later, she was downing one drink after another, completely happy. Alicia says the protagonist really knows how to pick a place, since the food is cheap and the beer is delicious. He even thinks it's better that he got kicked out. Rude asks if she'll be okay drinking that much. Alicia yells for another drink. The protagonist reminds her that just a few hours ago, she was seriously injured. She smiles, saying she's ready for more, and that today is great. Alicia makes a toast with him, asking why wouldn't she drink. The protagonist asks what her plans are now. She says she'd like to get to know him better, leaving him surprised. Alicia looks at him and asks why he decided to become an adventurer. He tells her that some time ago, the village where he lived was attacked by monsters. Those monsters destroyed everyone he loved, friends, family. They took everything from him. While Rude was crying over his mother's body, someone showed up, thanks to an S-rank adventurer who stepped in to protect him from the monsters. Everything changed. The protagonist looked at that person who smiled back, showing a confidence he had never seen before. The adventurer began fighting the monsters, and thanks to that, Rude survived. Those memories would never be forgotten. Since then, Rude wanted to become an S-rank adventurer to save others. That was the reason he chose this path. The elf smiles, saying that's a good goal. He asks if she's going to laugh now. Alicia smiles and says she also dreamed of reaching S-rank. Besides that, she always fought to become stronger before she was cursed. Alicia says she's sure there are still companions trapped in the abyss, and because of that, no matter what happens, she will face that monster again. The protagonist is impressed. She says that for now, until they're strong enough to reach their goals, they could form a party. Rude gets a little worried about that and tries to say something, but the two idiots from earlier approach the table, grabbing the elf's hand. The blonde guy says he's been drinking with a pretty lady, calling the protagonist butcher. Rude gets irritated, realizing these are the same two from before. The two start bothering Alicia, telling her to stop drinking with the protagonist and come with them. Suddenly, the protagonist stands up, grabs one of them by the shoulder, and tells him to let her go immediately. The guy gets angry and grabs Rude, insulting him. Rude and the two men stare each other down. Alicia tells them to stop right now. The two look at her as the elf says they're in a tavern, so if they want to fight, they can sit at the table with her. Alicia raises her mug, happily saying that whoever drinks more wins. She starts drinking her first mug. The crowd cheers and 2 mugs are placed on the table. The 2 men are already a bit drunk, but the bald one is drinking 2 mugs at once. Time passes, and the table starts filling with empty glasses. Rude smiles, watching as the people keep celebrating loudly. The cheers can be heard from the street. The bald man is completely defeated. The dumb blonde can't take it anymore either, while the elf remains strong, emerging victorious. Everyone celebrates, declaring Alicia the winner. She turns to the protagonist and shows that she's fine. He smiles and nods in agreement. They move to a corner of the bar. Rude tells her she did great, considering she was already drinking before the contest. Alicia just smiles. She points at him and says Rude is her savior, adding that she couldn't just sit back while her savior was being ridiculed. Alicia suddenly stops talking and falls onto the protagonist's chest. He looks at her and says he has no choice, activating his transfer ability again. She recovers from the drunkenness, and he explains that he transferred all her intoxication to himself since it doesn't affect him. Alicia is delighted, saying that first it was the curse, now the drunkenness, and that only makes her want to form a party with him even more. She heads back to the bar, saying she's going to drink even more. The elf looks at the dish of the day and says it's a shame she can't taste it. The bartender comments that apparently, Monsters have taken over the fishing grounds of Berman. He already sent a request to the guild, but all the high-level adventurers are out. He asks the two if they'd accept the request. After agreeing, they head to the Barnabas fishing area. Alicia is excited, seeing that the place is truly beautiful. She says they need to defeat the monsters as quickly as possible so they can try the chef's special dish. Suddenly, the protagonist notices something. Something rises from the water, almost hitting him. Rude smiles, saying that the monster the owner mentioned has arrived. Alicia notices something that leaves them both stunned. Several more monsters begin to surround the boat they're on. The monsters start to appear beneath the boat. Rude uses his eye to analyze the monsters, checking their levels and abilities. They begin launching their attacks. The protagonist manages to defend himself with his sword. However, the monsters don't stop attacking, and more keep coming. Rude keeps defending, thinking the attacks aren't stopping for even a second. The boat starts rocking, and he thinks he won't be able to keep defending without something to support himself. He gets irritated, throws his sword aside, and jumps into the water, thinking that if it's like this, the real fight begins now. Alicia remains on the boat, not understanding why her partner suddenly jumped into the water. Rude is surrounded by monsters in the water. Still, he smiles and calls the fish to battle. The monsters begin attacking. Rude uses his thunder cloak skill, hitting them all at once. The attack is so powerful that its intense glow can be seen from the surface. Several monsters float up, lifeless, and the protagonist also surfaces. Alicia shouts for him, worried, but the protagonist reassures her, saying he's fine. Surrounded by the bodies of the monsters, he thinks there are still a few left. He notices that the Gurnets are stopping their attack and retreating. Rude wonders if they're being cautious or protecting something. The protagonist says he's going to take another look underwater and asks Alicia to do something. Though confused, she listens carefully to the plan. Rude dives again with a rope tied around him and realizes the monsters aren't attacking or fleeing. That means they're guarding something. He dives a bit deeper and is surprised by what he finds. At the bottom of the river, there's a giant creature. Rude uses his eye to analyze it and sees that the monster is level 38. He wonders if it's an anemone or a hermit crab. Suddenly, one of the tentacles starts making noise and releasing air. The tentacle detaches from the creature and transforms into a new monster. Rude is shocked to see that this creature is producing the Gurnets. He thinks they need to defeat it, and since the monster isn't attacking, decides to return and prepare. But suddenly, he feels something grab him. The creature has caught one of his legs and starts pulling him downward. The Gurnets begin attacking, and the protagonist realizes they hadn't attacked before because they wanted to distract him from the tentacles. Rude grabs one of the tentacles and uses Thunder Cloak. He asks the monster what it thinks it's doing, emphasizing that no matter how big the body is, if it's in contact with him, it'll take damage. Looking closer, the protagonist sees the tentacles are severed. Rude remembers it's the autonomy skill. The monster detached its tentacles to avoid fatal damage. Suddenly, the monster begins attacking the protagonist with everything it has. Rude panics as he's running out of air. He starts pulling on the rope, signaling. Above the water, Alicia is alert and upon seeing the signal, knows it's the right moment. She begins using her wind magic to push the boat. The rope begins pulling, and at the last second, the protagonist is dragged by the boat. The creature watches as Rude is pulled out. When they reach the riverbank, Alicia asks if he's okay. Rude stands up, thanking her for saving him. He explains that there's a boss underwater, continuously spawning Gurnets. Also, it heals quickly, so they need to return fast. Alicia explains that monsters have a huge advantage underwater and that her magic doesn't affect them. She asks if he has a plan. Rude says there's only one way. He lowers his head, thinking that he needs to make a decision, especially since Alicia already mentioned the curse and still wants to form a team. That's why he needs to reveal his secret before she makes a decision. At the riverbank, he asks her not to tell anyone what he's about to show. She's confused, but just watches. Meanwhile, deep in the river, the creature continues spawning more monsters. Suddenly, she senses something approaching. On the horizon, a light moves toward them. It's the protagonist with his high-speed swimming ability. The Gurnets try to attack him, but he's far too fast and defeats them all in seconds. The boss sees this and becomes furious. It begins attacking with its tentacles, but Rude dodges them all, continuing to swim between them. He heads straight for the boss. A sound is heard, and the water turns red. The protagonist lands his strike, and now that he's made contact with the boss, he smiles and says it's over. Rude uses Lightning Cloak, striking the boss with full force. Both the boss and the Gurnets are defeated. The protagonist thinks the fishing spot will now have peace, but the real problem is Alicia. He worries about what she might think after seeing him devour a monster. With the monster situation resolved, he returns to the surface. When he looks at the shore, there's no one there. The protagonist smiles and starts getting out of the water, wondering why he thought she'd wait for him. It seems he was just being hopeful again. Suddenly, he hears a voice saying he's taking too long. That freezes Rude. Alicia is carrying some branches and asks if the protagonist is okay and if he defeated the boss. Rude says he managed to defeat it. She smiles and says she couldn't just wait around, so she decided to gather firewood to make a fire and dry the protagonist's clothes. It leaves him speechless. Still confused, Rude asks if everything is really okay, even after she saw what he did. She starts building the fire and says she was a little surprised, but smiles and adds that he trusted her enough to reveal the greatest secret he had, and that made her happier than anything else. Rude is shocked by those words but quickly starts to feel better, and thanks her for it. The protagonist says there's one more thing. He starts pulling on a rope, explaining that he wanted to absorb the boss's abilities too, so he cut a piece and brought it with him. As he continues pulling, he comments that it would be weird if he was the only one eating. Alicia comes closer, asking if he really brought something back. He shows a fish and says he managed to catch a barnumus, though it might be a bit weird eating it near a monster. Before he can finish talking, Alicia interrupts him, excitedly shouting that she's going to eat. Rude smiles and starts laughing. As the sun begins to set, he says that while they eat, he'll tell the story of the first time he ate a monster. They place the food and clothes near the fire. Alicia tries the fish and is happy, saying it's delicious, though still a bit surprised that the protagonist eats monsters. Rude explains that this is how a weak E rank got a little closer to his dream. Alicia comments that he used that power to save her from the adventurer hunters and from the curse. Watching him eat, she says that when monsters are cooked like this, they really do look tasty. The protagonist made gurnard fillets and miso stir-fried tentacles. He's satisfied by her comment and says monsters are surprisingly delicious. Rude admits he no longer needs to eat gurnabs, but emphasizes they have to be cooked the right way. He asks if Alicia wants to try, but she replies that she's not sure she'd survive the side effects. However, as soon as she finishes eating, she declares that she wants more. With a smile, Alicia asks if the protagonist wants to join her party. He stays quiet for a moment, then asks if she doesn't know anyone stronger for that. Alicia lowers her gaze and explains that it's already been 5 years since she was marked, and considering the human life expectancy, whoever's still alive has probably retired. She points out that most frontline adventurers are crazy, and she can't trust them. Reaching out her hand, she says she wants someone to adventure with, someone she can trust 100%. If that person is him, she's willing to try again. That deeply moves Rude. He closes his eyes, smiles, and accepts the request, saying that now they're a duo. The next day at the Adventurers Guild, Alicia is excited, shouting that they need to prepare for the group's first job. Rude comments that he doesn't think they'll get a good mission since he's still E rank. She agrees, but says it's only this one time. They arrive at the reception and call an attendant. Alicia announces that they're forming a party and asks for it to be registered. Upon seeing the card, the young woman is surprised, realizing that Alicia is an S-rank adventurer, and asks if she's Alicia of the Emerald Storm. The attendant keeps examining the card, analyzing every detail, including the unique skill and other abilities. Then she asks why someone like Alicia is with the Miasma Butcher. Alicia gets irritated and asks what the attendant just said. The young woman quickly corrects herself, saying it was nothing. Ignoring the provocation, Alicia asks to register the party and inquires about the requirements for raising Rude's rank. The attendant checks the reports and informs them that he has already fulfilled the necessary achievements, but still needs to complete combat missions. Determined, Alicia requests the most difficult subjugation mission available. As soon as they receive the mission, they head to the outskirts of Bologna to deal with a pack of wolves. The wolves are around level 11, and their main skill is scent detection. Rude smiles and uses his stealth skill, sneaking up on the wolves from behind. By the time the wolves notice him, it's already too late. He attacks quickly, taking down several of them. One of the wolves howls, calling reinforcements, and Rude tells Alicia that the newcomers can be handled by her. She wastes no time and summons her spirit, Sylphide, asking her to lend her power. Rude is impressed to see his partner's unique skill. Sylphie begins to use her powers, surrounding Alicia in a powerful aura, leaving Rude even more astonished. The wolves continue to attack, but Alicia counters with Cyclone Slash. A powerful gust of wind is released, instantly defeating the wolves. All the wolves in front of her are wiped out with no chance to react. The protagonist is stunned by the amount of power. He observes the destruction on the ground and the wolves' bodies, thinking it's an absurd amount of force, something impossible to dodge. Alicia smiles and comments that her power before the curse still hasn't returned to normal. Rude begins to imagine what this woman would be like at full strength. Suddenly, a noise catches his attention. More wolves have arrived, and one is already charging in to attack him. Surprised, he realizes he didn't expect so many wolves to be hiding. The wolf is very close, and Rude won't be able to block in time. Alicia calls out to Sylphie, and a bright light appears. The attacking wolf suddenly stops, and everyone is confused as Alicia and Rude vanish. Then a noise from above catches their attention. Looking up, they see the two of them flying. Surprised, Rude comments that it's incredible and that he didn't expect Alicia to be capable of something like that. He thanks her for saving his life, but she says if he wants to thank someone, he should thank little Sylphide. Looking down, Alicia warns that it's not time to drop their guard, mentioning that she saw 5 more wolves in the bushes and there are probably many more hidden. Rude says it's his turn to act, leaving Alicia confused. He activates his echolocation skill and identifies all the hidden wolves, saying there are about 30. He starts laughing, thinking that with those and the ones they've already faced, they can finish the mission all at once. He asks Alicia to attack the spots he points out. The hidden wolves begin to notice a strong light and are terrified. A powerful attack hits the hiding spot of some wolves, while others try to flee. Alicia continues attacking from above, taking several of them down. Rude notices that his echolocation loses precision in open areas and that Alicia can't target multiple enemies at once. However, he concludes that if they attack in a circle, they can herd the wolves into one single point. Alicia takes a deep breath, saying her part is done and the rest is up to him. The wolves, now gathered and scared, become easy prey. Rude calmly approaches and activates paralysis breath, covering the area in a dense mist. One by one, the wolves fall, immobilized, watching the scene. Rude thinks it's time to finish the mission. By late afternoon, they count 52 wolves defeated. Surprised, Alicia says she can't believe they found that many. Rude reflects that maybe the wolf population has increased a lot recently. Curious, he asks about the spirit magic Alicia used earlier. She points to Sylphide and explains that she can use the magic of the spirits present in nature. She says spirits are everywhere, even if they're not visible. But to use their powers, she has to offer her own magic as compensation. That way, she can cast powerful spells while consuming very little MP. Additionally, Sylphie has the ability to levitate people. Sylphie flies to Rude's head and starts pulling his hair, while he complains that he's never heard of wind magic that strong. The small spirit keeps pulling harder, ignoring his complaints, while Alicia laughs, saying that Sylphie loves causing trouble and that the more he complains, the more she'll enjoy it. Alicia warns that night is approaching and they need to head back. Sylphide starts levitating the protagonist again, and Alicia comments that they'll fly part of the way back. With the sun setting on the horizon, Rude flies alongside Alicia, amazed by the experience. He takes the opportunity to ask about the other types of magic she specializes in. Alicia explains that she specializes in water, ice, light, and earth magic, but she doesn't have good compatibility with dark or fire spirits. She explains that when a spirit has poor compatibility with the user, the magic consumes a lot of energy or the spirit might refuse to help. Sylphie looks at Rude, and Alicia comments that it means she likes him. However, the small spirit starts tugging on the protagonist's ear, making him complain and ask if that's how she shows affection. Laughing, Alicia confirms that yes, it is. Suddenly, Rude notices something strange. Up ahead, a column of smoke rises into the sky. He shouts to alert Alicia and says there must be a village in that direction. As they get closer, they see a monster roaming through the village, destroying everything in its path. People run in panic as the flames spread and the monster continues its relentless march. Suddenly, the monster stops upon encountering 2 people. One of them, kneeling, mutters that the wolves weren't the only monsters in the area, wondering why a Baphomet would be there. The monster then creates a magic circle, terrifying the warrior. Something begins to emerge from the circle, taking the form of a spear. The Baphomet fires it at high speed toward the 2 men, but suddenly a water shot hits the spear, saving them. One of the men is confused by what's happening when, through the flames, a man appears. It's Rude, who used his water bullet skill. Beside him is a small water spirit. The monster stares directly at him, but Alicia uses the distraction and appears behind the 2 men, asking if they're okay. She explains that she and the protagonist will take care of the monster and asks them to summarize what happened. While Alicia talks to the 2 men, the protagonist advances and uses his eye to analyze the enemy. The system reveals that the Baphomet is level 27. Rude reflects that although the monster's level is lower than the lizard he faced before, its stats are on another level, indicating it's no ordinary monster. More magic circles begin to form around the Baphomet. The protagonist watches closely, recognizing this as an advanced ability tied to magical principles. The monster begins its attack, forcing Rude to dodge. He thinks his magic is too weak to be used in battle, but keeps advancing. The monster, surprised by his boldness, watches as the protagonist draws closer. Rude leaps to attack, thinking that if he could devour this monster, it would be perfect, as he'd be able to use its magic in battle too. He tries to strike, but the monster blocks the blow with its hand. Surprised, Rude notes its toughness and wonders if that ability is Iron Claw. If it is, he'll have to rely on brute strength to overcome it. Taking advantage of the close range, the Baphomet unleashes 4 more attacks. An explosion rocks the area, and the elf is startled by the impact. However, the protagonist appears unharmed, and Alicia runs to him, asking if he's okay. He confirms he is, while analyzing the monster. Rude realizes that the Baphomet used 2 attacks to strike and 2 to defend, making it a strategically difficult opponent. Alicia informs him that the monster raised its guard and that they need to exchange information while they can, stressing that the villagers haven't fully evacuated yet. She had already called for help with the evacuation and emphasizes that minimizing collateral damage is the priority, limiting her ability to use stronger spells. While fighting the Baphomet, Rude deduces that Alicia must be low on mana due to the previous battle. He decides that the responsibility to handle the situation falls on him. Suddenly, Alicia asks for permission to use her magic, surprising Rude. However, she shows confidence and asks him to trust her. Determined, Rude charges forward, ignoring the monster's attacks and focusing on his own strike. Meanwhile, Alicia begins casting water magic. Her blasts collide with the monster's attacks, protecting the protagonist. Rude is impressed by Alicia's ability to cancel out the Baphomet's spells with equally powerful opposing magic. Sensing the threat, the monster begins using another spell, levitating several stones and hurling them toward the two. Alicia, however, remains calm and uses her magic to make the stones crash into each other. Rude realizes she's conserving mana, avoiding collateral damage with impressive magical control. He smiles, acknowledging that this is expected of an S rank. With Alicia's protection, Rude finally reaches the monster and leaps to attack, now using physical reinforcement. This time, he easily breaks through the Baphomet's defense, delivering a devastating blow. The monster, full of rage, tries to strike Rude with its other hand, but the protagonist stands still, trusting completely in his partner. A few seconds later, a fire attack hits the Baphomet directly. The monster screams in pain while Alicia, from a distance, controls the flames that consume it. She smiles and taunts the Baphomet, asking how it feels to taste its own power. The monster burns until it stops moving. With the danger gone, the villagers watch the scene, terrified by the monster's scream. A young man, still confused, wonders if the explosion and the scream mean that the two adventurers have won. An injured man laments that he couldn't help in the battle. Suddenly, Alicia appears, thanking the young man for helping with the evacuation. He asks if she's okay, and the elf smiles, saying yes, confirming that the Baphomet was defeated. However, she warns that although she landed a fatal blow, if the monster somehow survived, it might attack again. They need to locate the Baphomet to finish the battle, and that's why she wants to ask the villagers for help. The young man shouts that if the monster is within reach, they'll do everything they can to help. She starts laughing, and the young man looks a bit confused. Alicia says that if they have any food to share, she'd be grateful because she's starving. Later in the forest around the village, the protagonist is preparing Baphomet meat. Alicia arrives, cheerful, saying she's back. He greets her and asks how the villagers are. She says everyone managed to escape safely, thanks to the two adventurers who helped with the evacuation. Alicia sits beside the protagonist and explains that she told everyone they were after the Baphomet, so no one would suspect the body had disappeared. Rude apologizes for making her lie and thanks her for the help. He starts to drool, saying he's hungry and the Baphomet soup looks delicious. Rude finishes the dish with some mugwort and ginger while Alicia watches. He tastes it and smiles, saying it's delicious, though it has a strong goat flavor. The little elf drools as she watches him eat. While he eats, new skills are acquired. Alicia watches the protagonist eating and comments that it looks delicious. However, seeing someone eating a humanoid monster is a bit strange. The protagonist stops eating and thinks that she's right. What's even stranger is that he's already used to eating it. While they're sitting around the fire, another monster appears near them. 3 level 22 monsters, the Stompers, stare at them. The elf yells that the monsters have arrived, and the protagonist says there are too many monsters in the area. Rude stands up, saying that if it's come to this, it's time to test his new magic. Everyone goes silent, and nothing happens. Rude asks what's going on. The Stompers begin attacking. The protagonist is caught off guard, and the boar charges through, hitting the camp and causing a small explosion. The Baphomet soup is thrown to the ground. Alicia yells, saying she thought the protagonist was going to use magic now. Rude starts to get up, irritated, and says he's low on mana and won't be able to help much. But this is unforgivable. The elf is confused by this. The protagonist looks at the food on the ground and says he removed all the impurities from the monster to prepare that dish, which took a lot of time. He says he really wanted to savor that meat, so he used the best seasoning. Those pigs will have to pay for that. Anger takes over the protagonist, his eyes shine, and he yells that now he's going to eat those damn creatures. Alicia panics and shakes him, shouting for him to calm down. She explains that the skill the Stompers use is called Swift Step. It increases their acceleration strength, making all their attacks powerful. In other words, even if it's not ideal, they need to fight from a distance to avoid the reach of Swift Step. The boars keep staring at them, and she says that, to sum it up, they need to retreat now. The two run, and the boars chase after them. The night passes, and the boars are still looking for them. They're both up in a tree. The elf thinks that it looks like they've managed to lose the boars. She starts whispering about the magic he couldn't use. Rude explains that he's never had problems using the abilities he's acquired until now. Alicia asks him to analyze it with his analysis eye. The protagonist agrees and realizes she's right, then begins using the eye. He gets confused because they say he should understand it instinctively. The elf thinks for a moment and says that if he still can't use it, there must be a reason. She pauses and says he's so dumb and his brain is so limited that's probably why he couldn't grasp the magic. Rude comments that that was kind of rude. She keeps thinking and says that the protagonist can use fire magic, even if it's weak. So that doesn't explain why he couldn't use the other abilities. Suddenly, the elf gets an idea. She says that maybe to use magic or monster abilities, he needs to learn to manipulate mana. Rude says now he understands. It's not enough to just have the magic. You have to manipulate mana. Alicia says she doesn't know much about mana, but it might be similar to absorbing monster abilities. The protagonist says he'll give it a try. He starts to concentrate and remembers the time he ate the minotaur. At that moment, his arm and wounds were healed. Soon after, a power begins to radiate from his body. Rude thinks that if he can manipulate this power outside his body, he'll feel strength rising in his arm. The elf is surprised by what she sees. The protagonist opens his eyes slowly and is also surprised by what he sees. He had created several magic circles in front of him. Rude feels satisfied, thinking he managed to make it work. He fires the attacks, thinking that if he can feel the mana, he can use it as if it were part of his body. The Stampings look up and see the attacks coming. The explosion is so powerful it causes a massive impact. The three boars don't survive. Wasting no time, Rude runs over and starts frying the beast's meat. Excited, he says stamping ribs are going to be the perfect dish. He turns to Alicia and apologizes for taking so long, but she says it's okay since it was something he needed to do. Alicia begins to explain that Rude needs to use mana, not magic, to activate his abilities. Based on the last attack, the protagonist didn't end up exhausted. It looks like Rude will be able to use this skill consistently. He agrees, saying that as soon as he felt the mana spreading through his body, he instantly understood how to use it. And if mana can replace magic power, maybe Rude can use it to strengthen his body and weapons. Among adventurers, many choose to train their magical abilities, and most use them in close combat. By channeling magical power through the body, their skills improve. And if used on a weapon, the attack power increases. It's even possible to release magical slashes. The elf says now she understands, pointing out that the protagonist didn't have much magic before, and that's why he couldn't use the abilities. He finishes preparing the dish, and says he has much more mana now than before. But more importantly, it seems he can recover mana by eating more monsters. He eats a piece of stamping and absorbs the quick step ability. Alicia watches, thinking that Rude can absorb mana through food and even store it in his body. She looks at his food, drooling, and thinks those pork ribs look delicious. The protagonist sees her drooling and asks if she wants some. The elf hesitates, trying to hide it. Suddenly, they hear another noise and something is coming toward them. The two look to the side and another monster appears. A super stamping stands before them. Rude says the boss has finally arrived. The boar charges at Alicia. She freezes because the boss is too fast and she won't be able to dodge. Rude sees this and uses quick step to save her from the attack. The elf thanks him once again for saving her life. She looks at the boss and thinks that the moment she felt something in the distance, it was already in front of her. She's confused because they're not in a dungeon. A monster like that shouldn't be here. Suddenly, the protagonist starts getting angry, saying it's always the same thing. The food he prepared was ruined again. He yells at the boss to stop interrupting. He asks if that boss would make a good roast, but quickly rethinks it since it has fire resistance. Still, if they throw it into the crater to fry, it might turn out good. That's the Stamping Cane, level 38. Rude thinks its stats are pretty strong too. He crouches down and starts using earth magic. The boss only has quick step and fire resistance. A hand starts rising from the ground, and the protagonist tells the boss to get ready to feel the wrath of a glutton. But the cane breaks the attack easily, leaving Rude stunned, thinking that thing was made of iron. The monster lands a direct hit on the protagonist, sending him flying. Rude crashes into a tree and passes out. Alicia gets worried, but there's no time as the boss is heading toward her. She summons Sylphid and uses wind attacks to hurt the boss. The elf starts breathing calmly. She thinks she hit the boss, but he's not using magic. His muscles and fur are as thick as armor. She stands no chance against that. The king ends up face to face with her. Alicia tenses up, thinking he's going to come at her with full force. The boss starts getting ready to attack again. Suddenly, an immense pressure is felt, and a ferocious roar echoes through the forest, stopping the boss. Rude is furious. He gets up, telling the pig not to dare ignore him because they're not done yet. Rude thinks he can't use Quick Step or Iron Body right now, and if it turns into a battle of endurance, there's a chance the damn pig might target the elf. The protagonist analyzes the situation but realizes he doesn't have a skill to finish the boss in a single blow, even if he runs in a straight line. With no other option, he closes his eyes, thinking this will be the first time he tries this. He raises his sword, thinking he has to try. The boss charges straight at him. Alicia screams when she sees the scene in front of her. Rude thinks that first he needs to gather mana from inside his body. Then he has to picture it flowing into the sword. The boss stares at the protagonist and attacks. At the last second, Rude opens his eyes and ends the battle with a single strike. Alicia is paralyzed. The boss has been defeated. But even the protagonist is confused by his own power. He looks around and says he actually pulled it off. The elf is in shock, saying the protagonist used mana to strengthen his sword even without training. Rude smiles, saying he tried to do it because he felt it was possible, since his mana was overflowing. Suddenly, his sword cracks and breaks right in front of them. Alicia looks at the sword, not expecting that. Meanwhile, the protagonist panics and starts screaming the sword's name. Feeling defeated, Rude says he overused it, so there's nothing to be done. The elf says the sword couldn't handle the mana. Besides, she understands how he feels, since a weapon is like an extension of one's body. The protagonist says that's enough for today and mentions he'll grab some meat from the boss. Meanwhile, on the 7th floor of the miasma dungeon, the boy from before is in combat. He uses his fire powers to attack a level 17 giant rat. His teammates are also helping fight the rats. The one in the black cloak strikes one of the rats and finishes it off with ease. After a long battle, they finish clearing the area. The young man comments that these are a superior species of miasma rats. The big rat is a tough enemy. His teammates smile and say that even so, they couldn't beat their teamwork. They all start laughing together, but the one in the black cloak looks back, and the leader asks what's wrong. The boy starts walking, saying it's nothing much. He just thought he heard voices. Suddenly, they find a staircase, and thinking it's a secret passage, they decide to check it out. As they descend, the three of them are amazed, because right there in front of them is a glowing chest. The boy observes carefully and says it doesn't seem to be a trap, while the others think it might be a treasure. They find a sword inside the chest. The boy says he can feel magic coming from it. The three of them get excited, thinking it's a powerful sword, and they'll be able to sell it for a good price. Regard asks if they're sure it's not a cursed sword, but the leader tells him not to be so negative. He explains that since they haven't found the protagonist around, they've been struggling to make easy money. That means this is a gift sent to them. Regard agrees with that. The boy in the black cloak smiles, saying it's getting late. It's good if the sword is a blessing. Regard comments that he heard Rude has been hanging out with a pretty elf. The two start laughing, saying he's getting cocky, and they're going to teach him a lesson to remind him of his place. They start leaving the room, but Regard stays behind, staring at the chest. He begins to closely examine the open chest. While Regard was looking, the sword tried to influence its wielder to eliminate all the others. The next day, in the border town of Bologna, the protagonist and the elf are walking through the streets, and he comments that he thought about asking an old weapon vendor for advice. They head to a place called Miner's Hammer Weapon Shop. The shop owner, named Dome, begins examining the protagonist's sword. He says that for a sword forged by him to break like that, only brute force could have caused such damage. Dome asks what the protagonist put into the sword, named Whispers of Alicia, and if he plans to tell them. Rude replies that yes, he'll tell him everything, because he's known old Dome for a long time and trusts him deeply. After hearing the story, Dome is intrigued to learn that if the protagonist eats monsters, he gains their powers. He comments that this explains why Rude's power has increased so much. The elf girl says Dome doesn't seem very surprised. The old man comments that if it tastes good, it doesn't matter what you eat. Dome adds that the most important thing now is that the protagonist wants a sword that can handle a lot of mana. He emphasizes that because of the time required for research, it'll take a while to forge it. Rude asks if there's anything he can do to help. The old man replies that it would be great if he could get some high-quality magic stones. The protagonist says he has some materials with him. As soon as he drops the stones on the table, Dome is impressed. He suspects they include the stone of the general lizard, Baphomet, and even a minotaur. He comments that it looks like Rude's abilities have improved quite a lot. The protagonist gets embarrassed and says it feels good to be praised by the old man. Dome says that if he needs anything else, he'll let him know. While preparing a new sword, the old man gives him one to use for now. Dome warns him not to channel any mana into that sword under any circumstance, because if it breaks, the old man will charge him a fortune. The protagonist and Alicia get nervous but agree. As soon as they leave the shop, they go straight to the tavern. The elf girl suggests they avoid magic attacks for a while. Rude comments that the old man becomes scary when it comes to weapons. Alicia smiles and says that even though Dome is intense, she's glad she got to meet one of his friends. The protagonist gets awkward and apologizes for being so lonely. She starts laughing, and then the boy from earlier enters, saying it looks like they're having fun. He asks if he and his friends can join, calling the protagonist the miasma butcher. Rude gets irritated and says it's happening again. The elf girl looks at them and asks if they got a problem with them, because if they do, they can settle it by drinking like good adventurers. Rondo starts trembling with rage and suddenly loses his balance, falling under the table. The leader gets worried and asks if he'd been drinking alone, but then he notices Rondo hasn't sold the sword he found in the dungeon yet. The sword starts releasing a strange aura that urges him to attack everyone there. He tries to resist, but the sword's influence drives him insane. Rondo tries to stop himself, but is overtaken by the sword's rage and yells at the leader to shut up. He charges forward screaming and attacks his companion. Rigurd is confused seeing Magnus being struck. Still consumed by rage, Rondo turns and targets the elf girl, but Rude steps in and blocks the attack, saying this won't be solved with a drink. Magnus starts to collapse after being wounded. Rigurd stays worried, not knowing what to do. The protagonist keeps staring at Rondo. Rude keeps watching him, trying to understand what's going on with that guy. Other adventurers get angry and ask what Rondo is doing in the middle of the celebration. One of the men tries to hold him back, but the sword keeps releasing more power. With a single blow, Rondo defeats the adventurers. Alicia apologizes to the innkeeper for what she's about to do, but says she has to destroy everything. She casts her magic and hits Rondo, sending him flying and wrecking the whole place. They approach the hole in the wall and wonder what's going on with that guy. Alicia is shocked to see Rondo getting back up, saying he's going to defeat everyone there. Rude asks if she went easy on the attack. The elf girl says a regular adventurer shouldn't be able to get up after taking a direct hit like that. Rondo starts making strange noises and charges again, yelling that he'll finish them all. The protagonist runs at him yelling that this is wrong. Alicia asks one of the adventurers to take care of the injured. The two start clashing again. Rude takes the opportunity to analyze Rondo's status and sees that he's level 22, but with his mind in a state of madness. The protagonist continues only defending himself, thinking the guy has gone into berserker mode. The sword releases even more power. Rude realizes that compared to the normal Rondo, his stats are way higher now. Alicia yells at the protagonist to get out of the way. He looks at her, and she already has her magic ready, saying that this time she'll go all out. Rude jumps to the side, and the elf girl fires her attack, but the sword says face it, and begins to absorb all the energy. Alicia can't believe the sword actually managed to absorb that damage. She notices the sword is emitting even more energy, completely covering the boy's body. Alicia yells at the protagonist to be careful because that's a cursed sword. Rude looks at Rondo and asks if he's getting stronger by absorbing that magic. The boy is already surrounded by several things around his body. He can't speak anymore and only attacks. The protagonist blocks the blow but realizes Rondo's strength increases with each moment. He keeps defending, but the boy doesn't stop attacking for even a second. Rude begins to counterattack, aiming for non-lethal points, and hits one of Rondo's legs, but he's surprised to see the tentacles closing the wound. Alicia watches worried, as she can't help the protagonist. Her magic could be absorbed by the sword and make it even stronger. Even so, she doesn't want to just stand by and thinks that if she really wants to help her partner, she needs to find an opening and land a decisive strike. Suddenly, Rigurd appears, begging them not to finish off Rondo. He keeps yelling, saying he knows they made a lot of mistakes with him, but even though he was a failure and lived as spies, his companions became his family. With tears in his eyes, he begs for his friend's life. Rude steps forward saying he'll do his best. Rondo keeps screaming and attacking. The protagonist says he'll try substitution and warns that no one should interfere. The elf girl smiles and says she understands. He dodges an attack, thinking that when he used this technique with Alicia, it took about 10 seconds. Rondo keeps attacking non-stop while the protagonist dodges everything, thinking the problem is keeping the boy under control for those 10 seconds while he tries to break the curse. The protagonist takes a hit that pushes him to the side. Alicia screams in concern, but he had blocked with his sword, saying the strikes are very strong. He grabs the arm holding the sword, thinking that if he can immobilize just the sword, he can hold on. Rondo tries to break free, but Rude starts using his skill. The boy can't break his arm free. Rude uses earth magic to bind Rondo, since he won't be able to absorb that type of magic. The boy is completely immobilized. Rude lets go of Rondo's arm and approaches, thinking that if the cause of the madness is the curse, he can free him the same way he did with Alicia. That way he can bring him back to normal. Rude activates substitution and hits Rondo's chest. A dense aura begins to pour out, but the protagonist doesn't back down and keeps trying to use his skill. Little by little, Rondo begins to return to normal. Magnus and Rigurd watch everything. Rondo starts crying, asking for help. The protagonist remains determined to remove the curse from the boy, but it starts fighting back. Suddenly, Rude is launched far away. Alicia screams in worry, and the protagonist says he's fine, but the substitution failed. Rondo is taken over by the curse again, and the prison Rude created begins to crack. The protagonist thinks it wasn't Rondo who rejected the substitution. It felt like the sword had a will of its own. So if he can weaken the sword, maybe he can stop the curse. He starts firing fire attacks at Rondo before the strike hits. The boy breaks free. The protagonist is concerned because he only managed to remove the curse from Rondo's left arm. But now like this, he just needs to attack from outside the right arm's range. Rondo's body is almost entirely covered by tentacles. Rude notices Rondo is moving in a strange way. He managed to move, and the attack went directly into the sword, which absorbed all the magic. The sword reached an extremely high level of mana and released all the energy into Rondo's body, making him scream in pain. A massive pressure with a dense aura began to spread. Alicia watches, thinking that was the incarnation. Rondo's arms and legs began to change form, showing that his body was no longer his own. Rude uses his analysis ability. The system shows that what's in front of him is the two-headed curse called Graham, a cursed race with the condition of incarnation. In seconds, the curse attacks the protagonist, but he manages to dodge. Rude keeps fighting hard against the creature, but Graham's attacks are extremely powerful. The protagonist is hit and thinks Graham is too fast, but upon analyzing more carefully, he realizes the curse simply doesn't waste movements like an experienced warrior. Suddenly, Graham appears behind the protagonist, who turns around to face the attack. The elven girl, seeing her partner in danger, decides to act and channels magic through her body. She charges forward and lands a flying kick on Graham, but he uses his tail to steady himself. Alicia takes advantage of the close distance and fires a powerful attack that sends the monster flying. Graham crashes into a wall with a loud noise. Alicia says that apparently she'll have to get a bit more involved in the fight. Rude thanks her, saying he didn't know she was good at close combat. Alicia responds that a mage who becomes dead weight when the enemy gets close is a burden to her companions. She puts her hand on her injured arm and says this isn't an enemy they can fight carelessly, and that Rude needs to decide quickly because the curse has already spread too far. Graham stands back up again, and the elven girl says that if they don't fight to finish it, they won't be able to stop it. The protagonist hesitates to make a decision, but then prepares himself and says he understands. The healer asks Magnus to stay still, but he begins to get up and calls out to Regard. He asks if he heard what Alicia said earlier. Meanwhile, the two continue fighting the curse, but even together they can't find an opening. The protagonist thinks that maybe two heads have widened Graham's field of vision. He yells for the elven girl to fall back for a while, and though confused, she obeys and steps away from the curse. Rude slams his hand on the ground and creates several magic circles that raise a wall. Alicia sees it and thinks she understands. If they use magic only to raise the wall, Graham won't be able to absorb it. In the middle of the wall, a human-shaped shadow appeared, and the curse noticed it. It turned and attacked the shadow with everything it had, but it was just a clay dummy made to distract. The real Rude was behind it. Without hesitation, the protagonist landed a powerful strike directly on Graham. This created an opening for Alicia, who was already in position, ready to attack. She began casting her magic, invoking the Earth Spirit in a tribute spell. The Earth Spirit appeared. Its name was Nomiya. Alicia used Nomiya's power and struck the curse with a powerful earth attack, but she grew worried when she saw the blow hadn't defeated the curse. Suddenly, Graham attacked her. Out of nowhere, Rigard grabbed the curse's arm, stopping the attack. Rude was surprised to see the two of them fighting. Crying for his friend, Rigard shouted that he'd stop Graham even if it cost him his life. Magnus also charged in, shouting that the three of them together would land a decisive blow on the heart of the curse. Graham began to scream in pain as Magnus held strong, even with tears falling from his face. All three of them collapsed together to the ground. The curse was defeated. The price was the life of their companion, friend, and brother. Rude and Alicia remained silent, just watching the scene. Even unable to express the pain of loss, Rude noticed a sword lying on the ground beside them. He approached and picked up the sword. Rude thinks that even if he hides the sword, he can't know when the next victim will appear. Suddenly, the sword begins talking to him, telling him to destroy everything and everyone. Rude stares at the sword and uses his unique skill. The system announces that the curse has been nullified. The protagonist tells the sword to shut up, saying that empty words don't work on him. Suddenly, Lankar's opens the guild door, asking if everyone is alright. Rondo is lying on the ground. His body is vanishing. Rude holds the sword and says it's over. Lankar sees it all and asks them to meet at the guild to clarify what happened. After the explanation, Lankar says it looks like Rondo became stronger because of the sword's curse. With Magnus's testimony, the other adventurers begin to discuss what happened. The guild master sees the protagonist holding the sword and asks if he feels anything when touching it. Rude replies that thanks to his unique ability to nullify abnormal statuses, no curse has any effect on him. As long as he is the sword's bearer, there will be no more victims. Lankar says he understands, but warns that if one day the protagonist is overtaken by the curse, Rude interrupts and says that when that day comes, the master must do whatever is necessary. The elven girl seems a little distressed by that. Lankar thanks the protagonist and Alicia for containing the incident. As for Magnus and Regard, the master says he'd like to offer his condolences, but no one there will have time to rest. The elven girl asks if something happened. The guild master explains that all the adventurers there with him were summoned for this reason. He says that lately, the number of monsters outside the dungeons has been increasing abnormally. It seems these new monsters are coming from a recently discovered dungeon in Bello. According to research, the cause of this is a certain monster. Rude asks what kind of monster it is. Lankar says it's the miasma dragon Basilista. He comments that he's only seen this monster in books, but the estimated level is around 70. The protagonist is impressed. The guild master says the level isn't the problem, but rather the concentration of miasma. They say its miasma stimulates other monsters, making them leave the dungeon. This caused casualties among the research team, and those who managed to return are being treated now. Lankar states that if this continues, it won't stop with the monsters, because the miasma will escape the dungeon. The damage to nearby areas would be immense, which is why he called everyone there. Rude says he understands the situation and asks to be taken to the research team that made it back. They head to the medical ward. The protagonist approaches one of the injured, who is in severe pain. With a gentle touch, Rude begins to use his substitution skill. Lankar watches and says it's unbelievable. The elf girl just smiles from a distance. The adventurer who was screaming in pain can now sleep peacefully. The guild master says it's surprising. He didn't know the protagonist could cancel status effects on others too. Rude explains he can only do it if the person being touched doesn't reject it. And that's why the only ones joining the dragon hunt will be him and Alicia. One of the adventurers says that's madness. Lankar stares straight at the protagonist and asks what the chances of victory are. Rude explains that the fewer people he has to protect from the miasma, the easier it will be to move around. Besides, he's already used to fighting powerful opponents alone. The adventurer says the protagonist sounded very confident just now, but it's still risky. The guild master sighs and pats the protagonist on the shoulder, saying he understands and accepts. He will entrust the mission of defeating the miasma dragon Basilista to the protagonist. Night had fallen, and when everything settles down, the protagonist and the elf girl begin to leave. He says they need to get good rest to be ready for the next day. She asks if everything will really be okay with just the two of them. Rude smiles and says he can only use all his skills when no one else is around. He lowers his head and apologizes to Alicia for dragging her into this mess. She asks what he's talking about and says that if he had gone alone, he would have gotten beaten up right then and there. Rude says they're a team, and just the two of them are enough to save everyone. She jumps happily and agrees with him. The next day, in the Obelium dungeon on the lower floors, a level 20 goblin Bob attacks the protagonist, but he defeats it easily. Rude says that, just like the explorers said, they still need to go down 5 more floors, but no one mentioned the miasma had already spread this far. The elf girl says that shows how fast it's spreading, since even her purification items aren't managing to cleanse the miasma properly. They look down the corridor, and the protagonist says it looks like the monsters from the lower levels aren't even alive anymore. Rude comments that they still don't know how many floors they'll have to face and asks if she wants to stop. She interrupts and says no. Alicia says that maybe the protagonist's attributes won't work against the monsters, and even fighting up close, she might still land a few hits. And if she runs away and leaves another friend behind, she'll never forgive herself. Rude apologizes for making her say that again. He touches her and begins to use his skill. With a big smile, he says he's going to use substitution to pull the miasma out of her. She looks at him. The protagonist explains that he expected this, and that every time he touches her, he'll be able to remove the effects. But as soon as he lets go, the miasma starts building up again. She smiles and says that if that's the case, the elf girl grabs his hand and happily says that they'll just have to hold hands the whole time. Smiling, she says she can barely see her own feet because of the miasma. So besides using substitution, he'll have to guide her too. Rude smiles and says he got it. The two continue happily walking through the dungeon. Some time later, they reach the middle floors. The deeper they go, the more miasma appears. Rude says he used echolocation, and there are 2 monsters ahead. Alicia comments that if these monsters have withstood this much miasma, they must be pretty strong. Rude agrees and says he's never seen monsters like those. The elf girl asks if there's a way to avoid them. The protagonist says yes, but he wants to fight both of them. She looks at him and asks if Rude wants to eat the monsters. He says no, but admits he's curious. The protagonist says he wants to test the sword before facing the miasma dragon. Up ahead, they encounter the 2 monsters. They are rolling beetles, level 33, with high attributes. Rude starts using his magic. Between the monsters, the ground begins to crack, and suddenly, earth spikes emerge and throw the monsters far away. The elf girl is impressed, but the attack doesn't have much effect. One of the beetles gets furious, curls up, and starts rolling toward them. Rude asks if Alicia can stop the attack, and she replies yes, but she'll need to let go of his hand for a moment. The elf girl summons Nomiya and shouts for it to grab him. She starts using her earth magic and creates a giant hand that grabs the beetle. Alicia tells the protagonist to act fast because she won't be able to hold it for long. Rude charges forward and says it's time to test his new weapon. He begins channeling mana into it. The sword panics while the protagonist tells it not to break. A few seconds later, he's ready and strikes with a blow that cuts through everything in front of him. The beetle falls to the ground injured, but Rude isn't satisfied since the strike wasn't strong enough. The monster starts screaming in front of him. He raises the sword, thinking that if he didn't use enough power, he'll have to take another risk. Rude calls the elf girl, who smiles and says she understood everything. The beetle charges and Alicia also unleashes her magic. The protagonist uses the sword to absorb the elf girl's attack. The sword starts absorbing everything and becomes fully charged. The beetle is already close, and just as it's about to hit the protagonist, he says it's time for the sword to show everything it's got. With a single strike, the monster is completely defeated. What's left of the monster begins to fall to the ground, and the protagonist watches what he just did. Looking back, the other beetle is trembling in fear, but its end is inevitable. Rude attacks and finishes the last monster. With both defeated, he returns to the elf girl and praises her perfect magic control. She smiles and says everything went well. Rude holds her hand and uses substitution to remove the accumulated miasma once again. He asks if he can take a little more, but Alicia doesn't understand what he means. The protagonist tries to explain that absorbing her magic didn't fully restore his internal mana. She says then he's going to eat the monsters. Rude replies he wouldn't do that there. He'll just take a few pieces to bring with them. As they walk, the protagonist cooks a piece of meat with his magic. He starts eating and says it has a different taste. Alicia asks how it was using the sword. Rude says that after the sword absorbed enough magic, his physical abilities improved a lot. She comments that the most important thing is that the sword didn't break, even with him pouring mana into it. The protagonist says what worries him is that, according to the reports, the miasma dragon is bigger than a tree. He keeps wondering if the new sword will be effective, since in terms of weight, the old one was better. The sword looks around and asks the protagonist to give her something. Rude is confused, but she keeps insisting. The protagonist asks if she wants to eat meat, but the sword says no. She says she wants the magic stone. Rude goes to the monster and starts looking for the stone. Once he finds it, he gives it to the sword, which holds it and begins absorbing. After consuming everything, an aura starts to form. Rude sees the transformation and happily says the sword got much bigger. The elf asks how he knew what to do, and the protagonist explains that it was the sword who asked. The sword starts laughing after being praised, and the protagonist wonders if she got upset when he said she was weaker than the old one. Rude says he now understands how the sword works. Alicia says that's good because the next floor is where the dragon was last seen. Suddenly, they hear a very loud roar that makes everything tremble. Alicia asks if that was the dragon's roar. The ceiling starts to crack, and Rude realizes and yells that it's going to collapse if they don't hold it with earth magic. The elf says that if they only protect themselves, the stairs will be blocked and they'll lose the chance to fight the dragon. She says that before everything falls, they should try to cross. Alicia begins to fly, taking the protagonist with her. Everything starts to collapse as they fly. They feel anxious as the ground keeps giving way. Eventually, they see the end of the staircase, and as they pass through, an explosion happens right behind them. Even so, they manage to reach safety. Rude says he thought that was the end. The elf smiles, saying she used a lot of magic to pull that off. As soon as they look ahead, they realize the ground is darker than the others. The protagonist says he can use thermal vision while they walk slowly, looking for enemies. He uses his vision and notices something at the far end of the floor. He says it looks like something really big is on the other side. It's the miasma dragon. Its level is 75, with attributes higher than any other monster they've seen and several different abilities. Rude says the dragon's level is 75, but its agility isn't very high, and its vitality exceeds 500. She asks about its abilities. He says the dragon has poisonous fangs and claws. Suddenly, they hear another extremely loud noise. The dragon noticed their presence. Alicia shouts, asking what its resistances are. Rude says they're fire, earth, and dark. She says she'll use other elements and asks him to be her vanguard. The dragon arrives, and the protagonist yells that it's time for the big battle. The dragon keeps roaring and releasing miasma everywhere. Rude thinks of keeping his distance to analyze attack patterns, but with so much miasma, he doesn't know how long Alicia can last, so he decides to finish it as fast as possible. Suddenly, he notices something. In the middle of the miasma, a light begins to shine brighter. Out of nowhere, a jet of fire is launched by the dragon. He manages to dodge it using instant step. The attack destroys everything it touches. Alicia is shocked because the attack managed to melt a stone pillar. The temperature keeps rising as the dragon doesn't stop breathing fire. It continues to attack the protagonist, who just keeps running to evade. The elf sees her partner in danger and calls for Sulfiety's help. She manages to enchant Rude's feet with magic, greatly increasing his speed. With that, he lands a hit on the monster. Looking back, he sees it only caused a small wound because the dragon's scales are too hard. Rude thinks he might not be able to injure the dragon with the sword. Besides that, the magic used didn't have any effect either. He yells, calling Alicia. She also begins to attack. The air blades hit directly, but she can't believe what she sees. Even with spirit magic, they barely damage the dragon. The monster starts swinging its tail and releases several spikes. The two are startled by it. With a single movement, the dragon breaks a column and launches multiple spikes at them. Alicia tries to shield herself with magic. The protagonist uses Iron Body to endure the hits and thinks the dragon has immense defense and long-range attacks. How are they going to defeat it? The elf shouts and asks the protagonist to buy her some time. He's confused, but she explains that before her attributes drop, she'll use her special attack. Rude understands and gets ready. The dragon watches as she starts casting her spell. When the monster notices, it prepares to attack her. The protagonist uses earth magic and several hands appear and punch the dragon. He takes advantage of the opening and jumps in to attack. Rude manages to land a strong blow to the dragon's nose, knocking its attack downward. Alicia continues casting her spell and thinks she'll be exposed, so she decides to trust her defense to the protagonist. That way, she'll compensate for his part and pour all her power into the attack. She summons another spirit called Salam. Rude keeps fighting and distracting the dragon. The water spirit ordeal appears. The protagonist keeps pushing while the elf gathers all the spirits with her. Nomiya and Waken also show up. The dragon realizes what's happening, but the spell is nearly complete. Desperate, the dragon turns to her and starts attacking with everything it has. The attack rushes toward her, but at the last second, Rude steps in front and uses his sword to absorb it all. Alicia shouts that it's ready and tells the protagonist to move aside. He smiles and backs off. The elf begins her attack, using the technique called Spirit Quintet. A wave of powerful energy is released toward the dragon. As soon as the attack lands, it causes a massive explosion right in front of them. Already weakened by the miasma, she says that in the past, she would have defeated the dragon with a single blow. In the middle of the smoke, the dragon begins to emerge. Its body is full of wounds, but it's still standing. Rude touches her shoulder and says she did an amazing job, but now it's his turn to have some fun. Parts of the dragon begin to fall as it is heavily wounded. Alicia apologizes for making him use substitution again, since she used up all her magic in the last attack. He tells her to use what she has left to protect herself, because from now on, the rest is up to him. She starts casting magic on herself and asks him to be careful. Rude stares at the dragon, who despite being hurt, stares back. The monster lets out a deafening roar, and the protagonist takes a deep breath and roars back. The dragon is confused by his roar. Rude stomps the ground with such force that it starts to crack. He leaps with incredible speed. The dragon tries to hit him, but the protagonist moves too fast. The dark magic he absorbed seems to have given a new power to the sword. Rude smiles and keeps moving at high speed with energy to spare. The dragon shifts, and its scales begin to fall. The protagonist notices this and says it's easier to cut now. He speeds up even more and begins attacking the dragon from multiple angles. As he attacks, he realizes the sword is becoming less effective because the mana it absorbed is running out, damaged and irritated. The dragon locks eyes with the protagonist and releases another wave of miasma, throwing him back. He thinks that even though the miasma doesn't affect his body, the shockwave still pushes him. The monster wastes no time and uses the distance to attack again with its spikes. Rude thinks he won't be able to dodge and uses Instant Step. That allows him to avoid the spikes. The dragon uses its arm to strike him. With no time to escape, the protagonist gets hit and uses Iron Body along with the sword to defend himself. Even so, the attack is too strong and hurls him against the wall with a terrifying crash. Rude screams in pain and thinks he now understands the dragon's range even with Instant Step. His vision begins to blur. He admits that dragons truly are incredible. The monster starts to approach him. Even without strength, Alicia yells out, calling for her companion. Rude remembers the first time he nearly died, the fight against the Minotaur and the fall into the pit. He gathers his strength and says this time will be different. Using his earth ability, he creates a hand that launches him upward. He thinks that the chant from the past is nothing compared to who he is now. Rude prepares himself and begins falling toward the dragon, who sees him coming and readies a new attack. The protagonist thinks the dragon will use its breath again, and that maybe he can dodge using web manipulation. But if he keeps dodging like this, he'll lose in a battle of endurance. Rude decides to use the webs as a slingshot to attack. He gains momentum and hurls himself at the dragon, which fires its full power. The two charge at each other. Rude begins absorbing the attack with his sword. As he does it, he thinks there's no avoiding the heat, but he can absorb the mana from the attack if his fire resistance can hold out. Then he'll be able to boost the weapon with more mana and combine it with all the mana the sword has already absorbed, releasing everything at once. He stays firm without hesitation. Even though it's a powerful attack, the protagonist holds strong with the sword. The amount of mana and heat is overwhelming and gets more unbearable by the second, until suddenly he's enveloped by a layer of water. From afar, the elf girl shouts for him to hurry. Without the heat getting in the way, he can now move freely. Rude yells in thanks and gathers all his accumulated power, delivering a devastating strike that hits the dragon directly. The sound of the blow echoes throughout the dungeon. The dragon meets its end. Rude smiles at the end of this intense battle. He collapses to the ground, completely drained. Alicia runs to him, saying she'll heal him right away. Rude raises his hand and says she doesn't need to push herself more than she already has. He starts using his drain ability, and all the dragon's plasma begins to leave his body and flow into his hand. Rude says he can recover a bit this way. After a short recovery, he collapses to the ground, saying that now it's time to rest. The elf girl stays beside him, and he extends his hand, calling her. Alicia is happy with that and runs to take his hand. As soon as they touch, he uses substitution once more. They lie side by side, and he says they finally did it. Alicia takes a deep breath and says yes, they finally did it. She turns to him and asks if this is just the beginning. The protagonist smiles and says yes. He remembers the S-rank adventurer who saved him. That guy was way stronger than he is now. Rude sighs and says he still has a long way to go. He gets up and says that before anything else, he needs to grab a bit of dragon meat. After that, they start descending deeper into the dungeon. When he opens a door, the protagonist is paralyzed by what he sees. In front of them is a magic circle with a sphere behind it. That's the dungeon core. The elf says that even among adventurers, it's rare to see one. If they use the magic circle on the core, they'd be teleported straight to the entrance, returning instantly. The two of them approach, and Alicia explains that it's common to leave the core intact while gathering materials that don't exist on the surface. Rude says that if they leave it like this, one day the miasma dragon will be resurrected. He begins to reach for his sword, thinking that the Abelio dungeon was where he had his worst experience, but because of it he was able to open the path to realize his dream. The protagonist raises his sword and thanks the dungeon for everything it brought into his life. With one strike, he destroys the core, and a bright light fills the place. Meanwhile, at the guild base, everyone is gathered. Landcast asks if anyone has heard from Rude's group, and a girl replies that unfortunately, there's still no news of their return. The guild master lowers his head and says he understands. He thinks he always knew they called him the Butcher of Miasma in the adventurer world. Power is everything. That's why, even if Landcast tried to mediate, nothing would change, because an adventurer's life without power is very difficult. But if that alone was enough to make the protagonist give up on his dreams, then it was just another path to follow. Suddenly, someone bursts into the room, saying they have something to report. The guild master is startled, and the man says that Rudy and Alicia just returned using the magic circle. He announces that the mission to defeat the dragon and destroy the core was completed. Landcast is in shock upon hearing this. Everyone in the room begins to cheer and celebrate the victory, except the guild master, who remains still at the news. He starts to smile, saying he never imagined that out of all the adventurers, it would be Rudy who would save the city. Lenker stands up and says they should go welcome them. Those two are the adventurers with the power to change their fate. The protagonist and the elf are happy to see the celebration. Elsewhere in the city of Golar, a man receives a letter that fills him with rage toward the city of Bologna. The old man gets irritated, saying Bologna has so many dungeons that they destroyed the core of one without a second thought. He throws the paper aside, yelling that the plan to conquer the new dungeon was ruined. A young man asks if maybe this was actually a good thing. He explains that Bologna couldn't deny Golar's right to the new dungeon, so they destroyed it. If they tell that story, they could demand Bologna pay for the profits they lost. The Lord thought it was better to make money that way than to challenge the dungeon and lose adventurers. But if they did that, Bologna's guild wouldn't stay quiet. The young man replied that that was exactly what they wanted. That way, they could show that old man and his team who was really superior. Night fell, and Sylphide was watching the birds. Rude and the elf were camping. The protagonist was preparing dragon steak, which was extremely rare. Alicia started drooling again, saying the smell was amazing. Rude smiled and said that piece had been kept at the bottom of his backpack for a long time. He had taken it from the dragon and could finally eat it. As soon as the meat was ready, he cut a piece and started eating. The protagonist was impressed by the taste, saying it was delicious. He commented that that meat made every other kind seem ordinary. The sweet flavor was incredible, and the fat melted in his mouth along with the red meat. It was perfect. Alicia got excited to eat. She stood up and said it was decided. With honor and courage, she declared that tonight they would eat prize-winning meat. Rude shouted that he was already eating. She got annoyed and called him selfish. Meanwhile, Salfidi was calm, and the elf was yelling at the protagonist, saying they needed to hurry back and find a good restaurant. 4 days passed after the destruction of the Abelia dungeon. Some reports were being prepared, and the guild master apologized for calling them so many times, but assured them it would be the last. He informed Rude and Elfina that the mission report had finally been approved. Landcast then pulled out a pouch full of money, and said that was their reward, 1.5 million Regan. The protagonist was shocked and shouted, asking if that amount was really correct. The guild master explained that the average level required for that dungeon was 70, so the reward was fair. Rude looked at the massive amount and was impressed by the money. Lanker called the protagonist over and explained that since he and Alicia conquered the dungeon alone, he couldn't keep him at rank D. As part of the reward, he would also be promoted. In another room, some adventurers were going about their routines as usual. The protagonist started walking among them, saying that even though he had been promoted recently, he was already level 52 and showed his status card. He commented on how fast he had leveled up. Alfina was impressed and said that even fighting much stronger monsters, he was still leveling up at an abnormal rate. She thought that normally, once someone reaches level 40, progress slows down a lot. Suddenly, she looked at the protagonist who was laughing in her face and said he had finally passed her level. Annoyed, Alicia showed her own status, saying she was level 45. Alfina made a face and said that wasn't funny. Rude, on the other hand, commented that it really was strange because despite the higher level in combat, Alicia was much stronger. Alicia bragged, saying that level was just a number, and in the end, what really mattered were skills and experience. Rude then looked distracted toward the door when a group of men entered, accompanied by a bald old man. The Lord started laughing, saying he was surprised to see the infamous Miasma Butcher from the rumors. Rude tensed up and asked who he was, saying apparently manners were something he didn't know. The old man kept laughing and said that the adventurers of Bologna didn't even know who the lord of the neighboring city was. Rude was shocked, realizing that if that man was the neighboring city's lord, then he could only be the greedy lord of Golar. The lord then asked how they had the nerve to destroy the dungeon and questioned if it didn't belong to Golar. Rude replied that last he heard, the Abelia dungeon belonged to everyone. The old man explained that the dungeon was on the border between Bologna and Golar, but Bologna, being so petty, kicked them out, saying something strange was going on there. On top of that, they caused a monster invasion and in the end destroyed the dungeon. People began getting irritated, but the Lord kept asking how they would compensate for the lost profits and the damages caused by monsters in Golar. Alicia stepped in front of him and asked for calm, explaining that this should be handled between the guild representatives. She also said there were no reports of monsters invading Golar's territory and that Bologna's adventurers had already resolved everything, so there was no reason to complain. The Lord was furious, unable to reply. Rude looked at Alicia with pride, thinking that was expected from a rank S adventurer, someone who knew how to use words well. Suddenly, the guild master of Golar, a dumb blonde, began speaking, saying that the Emerald Storm called Alicia now belonged to Bologna, and that it was normal for a cursed one like her to end up in a place like that. Rude got angry, thinking that scumbag was the guild master of Golar. The blonde went on saying that this wasn't a matter for common adventurers. The Lord got excited with those words, and passing by Elfina, said she was just a useless survivor of a group that sacrificed itself for nothing, and that she should stop meddling where she wasn't called, calling her useless trash. Hearing that, Elfina began to lose control and released a powerful aura, scaring everyone. The dumb blonde was shocked and found it absurd to be intimidated by a girl below level 45. Suddenly, Lanker shouted for everyone to stop. Alicia began to restrain her aura but didn't take her eyes off the blonde. The guild master of Bologna shouted that he wouldn't tolerate fights inside and asked the Lord and the other master to accompany him. The blonde laughed and said that Lanker should keep the dogs away from Alicia. Rude asked who that piece of trash thought he was. Suddenly, another person appeared out of nowhere asking Elfina if she remembered him. The protagonist, annoyed, asked what it was now, since someone always seemed to pop up. As soon as Alicia saw the man, she remembered it was Ebert. He held her hand and asked if she remembered him. The protagonist felt a bit awkward and asked if she knew him. Alicia explained that Ebert was part of an old group she used to explore with. The elf started saying that back then, he really admired the Azure Trail and that Elfina could use several magical spirits at once and fought very well. As an elf, he couldn't help but see her as an inspiration. He said he knew how much she had suffered, and that's why he came to Bologna. Staring straight at her, Ebert asked if she wanted to join his party. Alicia looked at him while the protagonist grew more irritated by the scene. Ebert kept staring, waiting for an answer. Elfina thanked him for the offer but declined, saying she was already part of a team. She said that he was her partner, and the protagonist extended his hand, introducing himself as Rude. But Ebert pulled his hand away, leaving the two surprised. The protagonist stayed irritated while Ebert held Alfina's hand and said he knew what happened in the abyssal dungeon and that she had been cursed. But he couldn't believe an S-rank adventurer like her ended up in a team with someone called the Butcher of Miasma. Rude got even more irritated. Ebert kept going, saying that if she joined his team, they could make better use of her skills. She responded by slapping his hand away and angrily telling him to stop talking about things he didn't understand. Alicia explained that she formed a team with Rude because she wanted to, and that any insult against him was a direct insult to her. She made it clear that she appreciated the concern, but the curse cast on her had already been broken. Ebert was speechless and said that the curse came from the abyssal dungeon, which was SS rank, and it was caused by a boss from that place. Alicia turned her back and said she was lucky. He stood there, unable to believe what he'd heard. Meanwhile, Alfina winked at the protagonist, thinking it would be bad if his powers became public, so she preferred to keep that a secret. He smiled and thanked her. Alicia then mentioned that the ranks were being updated and that the protagonist was no longer rank D, he was now rank C. Ebert was horrified. He kept wondering why that had happened, especially after spending so much time thinking about her. Suddenly, he started getting irritated, thinking Rude had influenced Alicia. He began staring at the two of them and wanted to know how a rank D adventurer defeated the Miasma Dragon. But everything would change if Alicia's curse had truly been broken. Ebert assumed she was the one who defeated the dragon and that the protagonist was stealing the credit. Rude sensed a strange aura coming from the elf and told Alfina that the guy was staring like a lunatic. She explained that elves were very proud and held grudges for a lifetime. The protagonist looked at her, and Alicia asked what he wanted. Rude smiled and asked if she, being an elf too, was also proud and full of prejudice. She replied by asking what he meant by that, saying she considered herself a very humble, intelligent, and charming elf. What she lacked in cuteness, she made up for in strength. Rude thought that she was pretty proud too. The receptionist said she heard everything from the guild master, smiled, and handed a piece of paper to the protagonist, saying it was something rare. When Rude looked at the paper, he was surprised to see it was a guild certificate confirming that he was now rank B. The receptionist explained that he had skipped rank C and gone straight to B, and the two began to celebrate. She added that this showed how hard it had been to conquer the Abelio dungeon. She also mentioned that they had received a report from the village they saved, and that they also acknowledged the victory against the Baphomet. The protagonist looked at the certificate and said that he was finally rank B. Suddenly, someone touched Rude's shoulder and said that if it were him, he'd be even happier. After all, everyone in the city was grateful to him. Magnus and Rigard were there together, smiling. The protagonist got excited to see the two of them. Alicia called him and said he couldn't be that happy just for becoming rank B. What he really wanted was more than that, and Rude sighed and said she was right. Happily, he slapped his own face and shouted that it was fine and that he'd climb all the way to rank S. Ebert then started calling him and asked if he really thought something that stupid would be allowed. Rude asked what he was talking about. Ebert said that to explore dungeons, you need a specific rank, a rule meant to ensure safety, and that a man who only gets things by following others becomes rank B. Ebert looked on with disdain and said the Bologna Guild was full of idiots. All the adventurers present grew tense. Rude asked what he meant by that. The receptionist said it didn't matter what he thought, because ranks were given by the will of the guild. Magnus approached Ebert and asked if he was going to take back what he said, or if he wanted to get hurt. But the elf started laughing and said that, indeed, everyone there was an idiot. Magnus holds him and starts cursing. Alicia yells for him to stop, but with a simple movement, Ebert throws Magnus far away. He hits the ground, and the elf drives his sword into the floor beside him. In an arrogant tone, Ebert asks if Magnus can stop touching him with those filthy hands. Alfina screams, ordering Ebert to stop right now. He says she's always been too kind to people, so much so that she ended up with a deplorable man. She asks what's wrong with that. Ebert admits that elves are prejudiced and says it's hard for him to change his mind once he's made a decision. He smiles and says that even a humble, intelligent, and charming elf like him, as her companion, needs to show her the right path. Rude starts laughing, and Ebert asks what he's laughing at. The protagonist thinks both of them are way too proud. The elf says he already knows how to solve this because incompetent adventurers are a danger to others. He says he'll test him to see if he really deserves the B rank. The receptionist asks why he's deciding these things alone, but Alicia says it's okay. She shouts that if Ebert doubts the protagonist's abilities, he can see for himself. They head to the Bologna Guild's training area. Alicia apologizes to Rude, saying things ended up like that because of her. He smiles and says it's not just her fault, but also his own incompetence. Rude says he just needs to beat that idiot elf and prove he deserves to be with her. He starts laughing, saying in the end, adventurers only shut others up with violence. People start gathering to watch the duel. Alicia shouts that if either of them gets hurt, she'll step in right away. The two get ready and the signal is given. Ebert charges in with full force. Rude is surprised by the speed but manages to block the attack. The elf smiles and says the protagonist managed to stop the attack, so at least he's decent. Ebert keeps attacking non-stop. Rude feels pressured and thinks the elf is better than him with a sword. He also remembers Alicia said Ebert uses offensive and enhancement magic at the same time. He's an arcane swordsman. Suddenly, Ebert vanishes and reappears behind the protagonist. He lands a strike that grazes Rude, but he's not satisfied with just that. Rude keeps watching Ebert and thinks he can't keep up with the elf's movements. He needs to use his abilities to win, but if he does, the elf will start off by saying that being B rank is only for those strong enough to carry that title. Ebert asks if the protagonist understands he's not worthy of the B rank or of being at Alicia's side. Rude admits the elf is right. With the skills he has now, he doesn't deserve to be beside that elf. But Alicia was the one who chose him, and that's why he'll prove right there that he deserves to be with her. Alicia smiles when she hears that, but Ebert doesn't. Rude begins using his earth magic, and a giant hand emerges toward the elf. Ebert starts laughing and curses the protagonist, asking if he really thinks he can beat an elf with magic. He fires a fireball against Rude's spell. When the spells collide, a strong explosion erupts. The people watching get scared and shout that they're taking things too far. Ebert begins casting a new spell and says it's a disgrace for the Butcher of the Miasma. A large amount of energy starts gathering at the ceiling. The elf says this is the difference between their ranks. Ebert attacks, shouting for Rude to kneel before him. The protagonist braces himself for the strike. When all that energy hits his sword, it starts absorbing everything instantly. The onlookers are confused. Ebert is shocked while Rude says he knew the elf would try to win using magic. After all, elves are a proud race. The sword starts overflowing with energy. Rude charges in to attack. Ebert manages to defend himself. The two begin exchanging blows, and the elf thinks Rude's speed and strength are on a completely different level than before. He yells, asking if that sword is a magic sword. The protagonist replies that he's wrong because that sword is cursed. Ebert steps back, confused. He curses Rude, saying that's just another reason why he won't let Alicia stay with him. Ebert starts using his magic, activating his lightning enchantment and arcane swordsman ability. Lightning begins crackling from his body as he yells that Rude won't be able to keep up with his speed. Like a bolt, he charges and strikes the protagonist. It's the lightning palm. The audience is shocked. Ebert starts smiling, saying that in the end, the protagonist is just trash. He asks Elfina to announce the winner, but there's still no decision. Rude grabs his shirt and starts laughing, apologizing, but the shock doesn't work on him. Ebert yells, saying that's impossible because he should have been paralyzed by such high voltage. The protagonist headbutts him, making him scream. Ebert falls to the ground while Rude stabs his sword into the floor beside him. The protagonist says it wasn't his intention, but lately he's been getting stronger from all the falls. The adventurers start applauding, and Alicia smiles at the result. They begin entering the arena, saying it's over. Meanwhile, in Lanker's office, he was explaining that the Lord was taking care of some business in the capital, and he was acting as a substitute. Lanker says he understood Goler's complaints, and since they were managing things, they intended to cooperate in the recovery efforts. The Lord says he already knows that, emphasizing that what they want is compensation, not cooperation, and that they want a fair share of the dungeon since Bologna was greedy and took more than she should have. Now they must pay the price. Suddenly, a girl bursts into the room. The guild master Goler asks what's going on, since she didn't even knock. The girl yells that it's an emergency because something strange is happening in Abellio's new dungeon, which had already been confirmed as completely destroyed. There's a strange energy, and some things are happening. She says the area around it is covered in dense mana, and the concentration is rank B. Lanker shouts that that's impossible. She adds that 2 gargoyles are guarding the entrance and blocking any external interference. Lanker says that as for Goler's visitors, he doesn't think it's time to entertain such useless rumors. The two get irritated when they hear that. The leader stands up and says they'll organize a subjugation force to head out immediately. He orders the girl to summon any adventurer of rank B or higher, and especially Rude must be included in the expedition. All the adventurers are called to the Guild Master's Hall. Lanker begins to explain the current situation. They just confirmed that the dungeon cycle has begun, and they'll head to Abellio's dungeon immediately to subjugate it as quickly as possible. Rude asks what that means, and Alicia explains that the cycle is like an evolution inside the dungeon, but it's very rare. She says she's only heard of it a few times. She says this time it happened because of the dungeon's collapse, and it's her first time dealing with it. The elephant gets worried, since the mana concentration around the area is rank B. The protagonist says they're rank B too, and there are also some rank A individuals, so it's not a problem. Suddenly, Ebert calls out to the protagonist again and says it makes sense, since he was rank D until recently, and that's why Rude doesn't understand the gravity of the situation. The protagonist asks what he means. The elf explains that if the mana concentration around the dungeon is rank B, inside the dungeon it could be at least rank A, or in the worst case, rank S. Alicia adds that from what she's heard, the dungeon is constantly evolving like a cocoon. She explains that when the cocoon emerges, the surface will be flooded with mana, and since Golar and Bologna are nearby, there's a chance both could suffer catastrophic damage. The protagonist starts thinking about his city. Suddenly, the master approaches him and tells him not to worry. There have been few cases of dungeon cycles, and there are still many mysteries surrounding the phenomenon, so it may not be as serious as it seems. Landkar shows confidence and says that Rude was the one who completed the dungeon, so they'll count on him to lead the others. Rude feels a bit less worried, while Alfina feels proud of him. Some time later, at the dungeon entrance, the two gargoyles are standing guard. People watch from a distance. Rude uses his eye to analyze them. He sees that both are level 50 and reports that they're a bit stronger than the beetles they fought. Suddenly, someone kicks a rock, making noise. That's enough for the gargoyles to hear. Rude thinks they're in trouble now. The two monsters start attacking the group. One of them uses a petrifying breath. Alicia calls Sulfiety and orders her to dispel the magic, making both spells collide in midair. The other adventurers are impressed, but the attack isn't over yet. The other gargoyle charges, but the guild leader punches it in the head, slamming it into the ground. He gets mad and curses the monster, calling it an insect. The remaining gargoyle also charges at the leader, but Ramon smiles and finishes the monster with a single blow. The two guild leaders handle the problem with ease. Rude is impressed by their strength. Landkar says it's time to hurry, as they have no time to waste. The protagonist walks up to the other gargoyles and thinks they look edible. He starts burning the flesh. Ramon asks what he's doing, and Rude replies that the monster has regenerative abilities, so he's finishing the job. Ramon turns around and begins walking away while the protagonist puts some of the meat in his pouch. Inside the dungeon, they notice there doesn't seem to be as much miasma as before, and the dungeon's nature has changed. Rude says the structure hasn't changed much, but Alicia says they can't let their guard down because they don't know what's happening in the deeper layers. She emphasizes that even if the shape hasn't changed, the monsters will be stronger than before. The group encounters some monsters up ahead. Landkar says the biggest one is his, and the others can pick any of the smaller ones to fight. Ramon uses his skill, Warrior's Honor, and the adventurers receive a magic that boosts their attacks. The monsters charge in, but the adventurers start defeating them with ease. Alfina gets excited and calls the protagonist to join them. When she looks at him, the protagonist is irritated. The abnormal status nullification canceled the Warrior's Honor buff he had received. Landkar starts pulling his weapon from his bag, and with the help of Ramon's aura, he's ready for battle. The monster begins attacking, but the guild master spots an opening and ends the fight with a single strike. Rude remains standing while the others keep fighting. Alfina continues watching him. He's still irritated because his unique skill also nullifies support magic. More monsters begin to appear. The metal-headed one says he'll gather them all and uses his taunt ability to draw the attention of all nearby monsters. They attack the adventurer, who starts laughing and activates his interception barrier skill, yelling for everyone to blow them up. He tells his companions to attack now. The two of them quickly charge into battle. Hebert, with his incredible speed, defeats everyone in his path. The girl known as X-23 also strikes at the monsters, taking them down with ease. She says these monsters are hard to analyze because it's not easy to find their weaknesses. One of the mages, named Titus, yells that they should attack with everything they've got to resolve the situation. He and Milam attack together and manage to clear the area. Ramon watches it all unfold. The metal-headed one says his taunt is about to wear off and warns everyone to be careful. However, the ground beneath his feet starts to crack and a huge monster appears before him. The monster grabs him and he screams that there was an underground level, but with a precise strike, Milam destroys the monster. Axe turns and says the attack almost hit him, asking her to be more careful next time. The protagonist observes all of this and thinks they're strong. On top of that, their teamwork is perfect, making it hard to believe they're just an improvised group. He starts to get frustrated as he hasn't been able to help at all. Some wounded monsters look at the larger monster's body and begin merging with each other. Rude notices this and thinks that, in reality, these smaller monsters are just parasites. The protagonist gets excited, thinking this is his moment, and begins using earth magic. The two mages watch. Rude launches his attack at the monster, but it sees it coming and creates a magic circle that absorbs the stone magic. Rude is stunned and uses his eye to analyze the situation. He sees that the monster has earth removal abilities and that its nature is made of debris and soil. Ramon comes from behind the monster and defeats it with a single movement, saying the best way to deal with a parasite is always to strike the head. Ramon comments that even so, he never imagined Rude would use earth magic against a monster that came from the ground. He says that's just plain foolishness. Not to mention the protagonist also nullified warrior's honor. Rude feels uneasy about that, thinking Remon is right, since he lacks experience working in such a diverse group and can't rely on support magic from his companions. That makes him feel even more like a burden. Suddenly, Ebert calls out to him, asking if he can't keep up with the battle. He says teamwork should be the foundation of any adventurer, and that while the protagonist might think he's winning, in the end, he's not suited for that group. Ebert realizes that both Rude and Elfina are already at their limit with him. However, a massive explosion occurs, drawing everyone's attention. They call out for Landcars, but he replies that he's fine. The master then says that the most important thing is that the monster is parasitizing the bodies of its own companions. Landcars says the creature's wounds have regenerated, and furthermore, its combat power has increased. Ramon, with sarcasm, says that thanks to that, now they'll just have to deal with a single monster. He jokes that he'll help whoever needs it, but then feels something sting him. He slaps his hand, and when he looks, he's horrified to see it's a monster. Remon starts turning to stone, realizing that the insect's main goal was to inject petrification venom into them. Everyone is affected by the mosquitoes, and the monster is now free to attack them. In just a few seconds, the entire group is completely petrified. The monster approaches them, forming a blade in its hand, preparing to deliver the final blow. Landcars accepts his fate, saying it's a shame. But at the last second, Rude uses his web manipulation and manages to pull him out of the way in time. The monster is confused. That's how the protagonist had rescued everyone in his group, thanks to his unique ability that prevents him from being affected by anything. Rude starts laughing and says that now it's his moment. He touches Elfina and frees her. Alicia is happy and thanks him, and the protagonist replies that it's time to act. He uses his eye again and notices that the monster is at level 66. He tells her that the monster has no protection against magic, so she should attack and break its stance, and then he'll take care of the rest. Alicia summons her spirits and begins attacking with everything she has. The monster sees the attack but can't dodge and is hit directly. It falls to the ground, but both Rude and Alicia are confused as the monster's face shifts, and it starts to reshape, taking on a different form. Elfina says it's repulsive. The beast sends multiple insects to attack, but Rude pushes her back and shouts that this time he's going to blow them all up at once. He uses his lightning cloak and eliminates all the insects, while Landcars, even though turned to stone, watches the scene but can't do anything. The monster begins to move to attack again, and the two prepare for another battle. Alicia gathers her magic and hits the monster with an earth attack, sending it flying. Rude uses instant step to charge forward and attack. The beast, now high in the air, starts changing form once more and twists, managing to dodge the blow. Rude gets irritated. The monster takes advantage of the protagonist's lower defense and attacks him. Alfina yells for him to be careful. Landcars moves beside her with impressive speed and delivers a powerful blow to the monster, saving Rude. The attack is so strong that it sends the monster flying, creating a hole in the wall. The protagonist is surprised and asks how Landcars managed to escape the petrification. Landcars replies that he circulated magic throughout his body and thanks Rude for giving him time. The monster starts getting up. Landcars says that now they need to end this once and for all. The protagonist asks the master to leave it to him. Rude begins imbuing his sword with mana. The beast lets out a loud roar and charges to attack them again. The protagonist, with his eyes fixed on the creature's movements, delivers a powerful strike that manages to defeat the monster. Pieces of the monster begin falling to the ground. Rude looks at his sword and thinks that it seems he can now control the amount of mana he imbues in it. The monster lies in pieces on the floor. Alicia screams, but the protagonist says he already knew. When thorns emerge from his hand, Rude states that he won't let this damn creature regenerate again. He begins firing the poisonous thorns he took from the dragon, hitting the monster already on the ground. Each piece of the monster starts groaning in pain. Alfina says the poison is degrading it faster than its regeneration. She adds that if it weren't for the protagonist's immunity, the battle against the dragon would have been even more dangerous. Landcars calls the protagonist and asks if he intends to reveal his secret to everyone. He looks at everyone and asks what he should do, since he won't be able to get out of this without a proper explanation. Alicia agrees, saying that besides, they wouldn't be able to keep the secret much longer anyway. Rude agrees, but says he needs to heal everyone with substitution first. Sometime later, after everyone is healed, Rude finishes telling everything that happened. Landcars says it's hard to believe, but after watching the protagonist fight, Ebert interrupts the guild master, saying it's incredible. He grabs Rude's hand and says that in his entire life, this is the first time he's witnessed a miracle like that. The protagonist asks if he wasn't the one who said Rude wasn't fit to be an adventurer. Ebert tells the protagonist not to worry about the details, because now he sees that Rude is worthy of being with Alicia. Millam asks if the protagonist can really eat monsters. Rude is a bit surprised by everyone's reaction. He pulls out several pieces from his pouch and says yes, asking if they'd mind if he cooked a little right there. Quickly, the dishes begin to come together, and Rude explains they first needed to cook on low heat until the sides were fully done. After that, they had to eliminate the strong odor with herbs. The adventurers are surprised to see how he cooks. Everyone looks at the protagonist, who is savoring the food, imagining how delicious it must be. Rude starts talking about the texture and smell of the soft cricket, saying they're also very good, and mentions that gargoyles are crispy on the outside and juicy on the inside. One of the adventurers comments to his companion that the smell is really good, but his companion warns him not to be fooled just by the appearance. Milim also starts salivating as she looks at the wonderful dish. Ramon watches the protagonist and comments that it's all very peculiar. He asks if the protagonist can also recover his magic by eating. Rude is impressed he noticed, but explains that it's not magic, it's mana. That leaves the other guild leaders slightly confused. They're surprised to learn it's mana, since it doesn't emit a foul smell like demon energy. On the contrary, it seems divine. Ramon calls landcars and says they don't have much information about the monsters in this dungeon, wondering if they should retreat and wait for reinforcements. However, the guild leader says that's not a good option because the longer they wait, the more the dungeon cycle will advance. He looks at the protagonist, who's happily thanking them for the food, and emphasizes that they've been blessed with reliable companions. Therefore, they'll conquer the dungeon themselves. After everyone agrees, they keep moving forward and comment that if the topography hasn't changed, they're very close to the boss room. As soon as the protagonist and the elf enter a room, they're stunned to see that right in front of them is all the debris from the collapse they had forgotten about. Landcars looks at the blocked passage and says that after coming all this way, they'll have no choice but to turn back. However, Rude remembers that earlier he used magic to solve the petrification problem with his friends. He tries the same now, placing his hands on the stones and saying removal of soil and earth, causing all the debris to make noise and glow, leaving Alicia shocked and Abert impressed, while Ramon can't believe what he's seeing. Everything that was blocking the path simply disappears, and the boss room just ahead is now accessible. The protagonist gets excited and tells everyone this is the moment. They keep advancing and enter the room. Rude and the elf are once again stunned because right before them is a massive egg. Landkar starts explaining that it's the egg of the wise dragon. The protagonist interrupts and asks what this wise dragon is. The old man continues speaking and emphasizes that he's only seen it in books, mentioning that it cycles between life and death. When the dragon is destroyed, its soul reincarnates and is born again, using the dungeon as an incubator. The adventurers look at the egg, unable to believe what they're hearing. Landkars explains that even if its body is defeated, the wisdom of its soul will not disappear. Additionally, the guild master points out that he's heard the dragon also understands human language, leaving everyone even more shocked. He concludes his explanation by saying that all the accumulated wisdom in this dragon allows it to foresee the future. Axe steps forward, saying none of that matters, because in the end, it's just an egg. He uses his physical strength enhancement skill, and without hesitation, charges in, shouting that they can just end this before the egg hatches. Lankers tries to stop him, yelling for him to wait, but it's already too late. Axe is struck directly, and the impact is so strong that it injures him and throws him back. His companion asks if he's okay. The young man looks ahead upon hearing some noises and shouts that the egg is moving. Several tentacles begin emerging from the egg. They realize they were careless. Lankers explains that this is the egg's instinct for self-preservation and warns everyone to step back for now, because even though it's just an egg, it's still a dragon. Rude uses his ability to analyze the creature, but can't determine its status, warning that it's completely obscured. The masked man approaches the leader and suggests that everyone fall back, emphasizing that perhaps the best choice is to wait for reinforcements. Ramon continues analyzing the situation and states that once the egg hatches, it won't matter how many S-class adventurers they have. Stopping the dragon will be impossible. Lankers grips his spear and eyes fixed on the dragon, declares that he's going to end this here and now, but he'll need everyone's help. Without hesitation, the mages begin their assault. Their attacks hit the egg, causing a brief distraction. Lankers takes advantage of it and charges forward. He notices an attack coming his way but manages to jump and ready himself to strike. With a single blow, he slices off one of the monster's tentacles. The protagonist is pleased to see it, but the monster howls in pain and something begins to happen to the severed tentacle. Within seconds, another tentacle appears in its place. They shout that the monster is regenerating at an extreme speed. Even Lankers is shocked and wonders how the monster can regenerate so fast. The guild master looks at the protagonist and says he needs to ask him a favor. As soon as the monster sees the protagonist, it lets out a deafening sound, making everyone cover their ears. The old man reveals his plan, and the protagonist agrees. With that, he runs toward the monster, dodges an attack, and slices one of its tentacles. The monster continues to attack, but he manages to evade, or at least that's what he thought. The monster used one tentacle as a distraction while another grabbed his leg. Lankers is shocked and surprised, realizing that if the tentacle had been just a bit faster, he would have been in serious danger. However, in the blink of an eye, Ebert and Ramon rush in without fear, cutting all the tentacles holding Lankers. He's surprised by their actions and thanks them. The guild leader fights bravely against the monster, and after several attacks, the egg finally loses balance and crashes to the ground. Alicia yells that now is the time. The monster inside the egg stares at them, and Rude shouts that he wants to see if it can withstand his sword imbued with magic. He leaps, channeling all his energy and strength into a single strike, slicing the egg in half effortlessly. Lankers and Ebert are impressed. The egg begins to open, but the protagonist is shocked to see that the monster inside remains intact. Alicia sees this too and summons the power of Sylphide. Combining their strength, she unleashes an incredible amount of energy, hitting the monster. The other adventurers are astonished. However, as the dust begins to settle, they see that the egg remains intact and fully regenerated. Ramon yells that they're not getting anywhere with this fight, but before he can finish speaking, he senses a threatening presence. The others sense it too and start questioning what's happening. Suddenly, the egg starts to glow, and a deafening sound erupts from within. The adventurers realize that the egg has changed, and the monster inside is moving strangely. The elf declares that the wise dragon is about to be born. Seeing this, Lankers shouts that they're out of time and must end this now, emphasizing that they must destroy the dragon with a powerful strike. He explains that the opponent's regenerative power is a huge threat, but all the tentacles are fragile. The old man says they need to attack together to create a big opening. Everyone agrees, coordinate where to strike, and charge at the monster. The dragonade doesn't stay still and starts firing spikes to make things harder for the adventurers. Milam uses her barrier magic to protect Lankers. She looks at him and says she'll protect him, so he just needs to focus on the attack. The old man thanks her and begins using his skill, Charge. This ability strengthens the user's next attack with magic, doubling its power. Alicia notices that the guild master has activated his skill and asks the protagonist how they'll coordinate the destruction of all the tentacles. Rude tells her not to worry and to leave it all to him. Suddenly, the protagonist uses his ability, Command, connecting to all the adventurers at once. Abert and Milam are amazed and surprised to learn that the protagonist has this ability, as they can now hear him inside their minds. Using telepathy, he instructs everyone to destroy the tentacles when the countdown ends. The adventurers agree, the countdown begins, and everyone gets ready. As soon as it hits one, they all strike simultaneously, managing to cut off all the monster's tentacles. Thanks to that, the egg falls to the ground, and the monster becomes motionless. Lankers looks back and yells to the master that now is the time to attack. Having already gathered a massive amount of energy, he launches another skill called Absolute Void. The attack is so powerful that it destroys the central part of the egg. The monster collapses and everyone stands still, watching. Lankers raises his weapon in celebration, but he's so weak that he starts to lose balance. Ramon goes over and catches him, saying he hates to admit it, but if they hadn't fought together, it would have been impossible to defeat that monster. Lankers, relieved, comments that even in this situation, Ramon is still arrogant. The other adventurers begin to celebrate, saying their companions are no longer in danger. The protagonist starts laughing and raises his hand in victory, because they had won. While everyone celebrates, the masked man stands behind the monster, thinking this group is truly cheerful. However, now is the time to take the wise dragon's magic stone, because it will bring him a fortune. He starts searching everywhere but can't find it. As he keeps looking, a tentacle from the monster rises from the ground behind him, without him noticing. The moment he hears the sound, he quickly turns around, but the attack hits him before he can react. The monster strikes him, sending him flying. He crashes to the ground, screaming in pain. The wise dragon regenerates, and now standing, says that in the end, it wasn't entirely useless. The dragon starts walking, saying its body won't last much longer, and that it must wait until its next regeneration. It looks at the protagonist and declares that before that happens, all the worms who dared to interrupt its regeneration will meet their end here and now. Ramon senses a threatening presence and immediately gets into position, saying it's not over yet. He can still feel the presence of a monster. When everyone looks ahead, they see the beast, the true form of the wise dragon. The protagonist tries to analyze it with his eye, but can only see that the dragon is at level 1. All the other stats are blurred, and people begin to question how it's still alive. Alicia comments that it seems, at the moment of the attack, the beast buried itself underground to escape. The wise dragon says that mere humans dared to challenge the gods, calling them insolent beings. Rude is surprised to hear the dragon speak. Landcast explains that true dragons, the highest ranked beings of the dragon race, are closer to divinity and therefore can understand human language. The wise dragon looks at the protagonist and says it senses a hateful impurity within him, emphasizing that even though he appears human, it also sees him as a monster. The beast rises and challenges the protagonist to face it, telling him to do his best to entertain, but warning that in the end, he will tremble in fear. A bit farther back, Milim focuses her magic, but realizes she won't be able to maintain it for long. Gathering all her strength, she uses her skill Shadow Cloak. This ability conceals her form, shrouding her in darkness. With that, Milim vanishes from everyone's sight. Suddenly, one of the monster's arms falls off, and it looks at itself, saying it's starting to disintegrate. Titus is shocked and says the dragon is rotting. The guild master says that if they're going to strike, now is the time. Landcast thinks he just released a powerful attack and, if possible, would like to rest a bit to recover. But he doesn't have that time. Axe stares at the wise dragon in front of him and asks what kind of monster it is. With a fearful expression, he says he can't fight anymore and starts to run, declaring that he's getting out of there. However, the dragon notices and begins using its powers, asking if Axe really thinks he can escape. The monster uses telekinesis to lift all the surrounding pillars and hurls them toward the exit. The passage is completely blocked. The dragon tells Axe that he's not escaping and asks if he truly believes that even with only one hand, the dragon can't exterminate a rat. Landcast grabs his spear once more and declares that if they can't escape, then they'll show just how terrifying cornered rats can be. All the adventurers charge toward the monster and attack. However, their strikes aren't very effective, as the monster blocks and dodges with ease. The protagonist keeps attacking with everything he's got, but realizes none of his strikes are landing. The elf feels the same. She thinks it's as if the wise dragon is predicting their movements. The monster glares at them menacingly and asks if that's all they got, demanding they entertain it more. The dragon uses its skill Heavenbreaker, and its roar is so powerful that it blows all the adventurers back. Alicia, worried about the protagonist, runs to him and asks if he's hurt. He replies that he's fine, but in the last battle, he used up almost all of his mana. The elf stares at the monster and yells to Rudy that she's going to end this in an instant using her spiritual quintet, asking him to warn everyone. Using his command ability, Rudy reconnects with all the adventurers and alerts them that she's about to unleash her most powerful attack. So when the time comes, everyone must synchronize with him. Alicia begins to focus and calls upon all the spirits, asking them to lend her their strength. Meanwhile, the adventurers fight with everything they have to distract the wise dragon. As soon as the spirits are ready, she yells to Rudy, who informs everyone that the moment has come. With the power of all the spirits, she unleashes the spiritual quintet, her most powerful ability, a beam of energy so strong that it hits the dragon, who simply watches. The explosion is so intense that even the adventurers are thrown backward. Abert, struggling to see because of the light, asks if they did it. However, the dragon is still standing, and Ramon laments, saying they've unfortunately failed. The monster extends its hand toward the elf, saying that, as expected, it let its guard down. Alicia stares at the creature, but before she can react, the guild master leaps with his spear, trying to put an end to it. The monster senses his presence and, with a single strike, sends him flying. Titus watches in panic. He tries to use his bind ability, and several roots emerge from the ground, restraining the monster's body. Abert takes advantage of the situation and attacks the dragon from behind, but once again, the creature reacts, turning and biting the elf's sword. Abert is shocked, certain that he had hit the beast's blind spot, yet it still managed to counter. With another blow, the monster throws the elf far away. Titus stands in front of the dragon, who begins to break free from the restraints. While using its powers, the dragon asks if Titus truly believed that would be enough to stop him. Using telekinesis once again, it forms a stone sphere and hurls it at Titus. Alicia sees everyone fallen and panics, thinking that because of her weakness, everything will end the same way as before. She recalls her former companions and once again feels like she's failed to protect them. The wise dragon stands before her and says that he respects her, but even so, he will put an end to everything. He begins to approach, declaring that she must become food for his wisdom, and paralyzed by fear, Alicia watches as the monster gets closer. His eyes locked on her, Rude starts thinking they can't win like this. He wonders if at least they could delay the wise dragon long enough to escape through the magic circle in the dungeon's core. Maybe that way, they'd have a chance to flee. He tries to use his web manipulation ability, but is surprised to see it doesn't activate. Confused, he wonders if he's out of mana. Meanwhile, the dragon continues attacking his companions. The protagonist observes the situation and realizes that if he can't gather mana again, they'll all be wiped out. He looks to the side, sees the egg where the monster was, and even without meaning to, knows exactly what he needs to do. The wise dragon releases his dragon breath and Alicia, stepping forward, uses Sylphide to create a barrier and block the attack. Ramon takes the opening and uses his ability, Airblade, but once again, the beast defends itself with its magic. The dragon begins using water bullet and air blade simultaneously, putting the adventurers under immense pressure. Panting, Ramon thinks that the monster's variety of abilities is infuriating. The beast looks at them and asks what they think of its next skill. Suddenly, it starts gathering an enormous amount of energy in the palm of its hand. Ramon watches and asks if that's Lankar's absolute void ability. Analyzing the scene, he realizes this is the power of the dragon's wisdom. However, he knows the weaknesses of that attack and shouts, warning everyone that while the ability is charging, the dragon is defenseless. If they want to strike, now's the time. Alicia prepares to support him and begins summoning her spirits, Dale and Wakian. With their help, she imbues Ramon's sword with water and lightning, creating the Aqua Lightning Blade. Ramon is impressed and runs toward the monster with his empowered sword. However, that was exactly what the wise dragon wanted. Ramon attacks, but the dragon dodges and counterattacks. Ramon realizes too late that it was a trap. The monster's blow lands directly, severely injuring him. The elf is in shock, seeing yet another of her companions fall, collapsing right in front of her. Trembling, she begins to murmur that they don't stand a chance. Suddenly, her spirit starts to drift away from her. The dragon is using telekinesis to steal her spirit, commenting that such a rare entity makes him curious about its taste. Alicia reaches out, begging the wise dragon not to do it. However, he completely ignores her and simply devours the spirit. The elf, who was already exhausted, is now completely broken. She falls to her knees before the monster, murmuring that this can't be happening to her. The beast reaches for the elf, and with chilling coldness, says that charge techniques should only be used against more powerful opponents. He explains that first you create an opening, then deliver a blow with immense force. He grabs her by the collar and says there's no need to use such a technique against common rats. The monster asks if she knows why he used such a dishonorable technique and explains he did it just to see the despair in her eyes. Alicia can't take it anymore. She lost her companions in the past and now she's reliving it all again. Tears begin to stream down her face. The wise dragon crouches and asks if it's time to savor an elf. He opens his mouth and approaches her, and she remains completely still. But at the last second, the protagonist appears and punches the wise dragon in the face, sending him flying and saving his companion. Alicia is shocked to see Rudy's condition. He's exuding a red aura with darker tones. Suddenly, consumed by that rage, he begins to scream. One of the wise dragon's eyes falls out, and the monster complains that his incomplete body is already starting to fall apart. The beast looks at the protagonist and says he ate the eggshell, becoming a monster. The protagonist begins laughing uncontrollably, feeling an immense amount of mana flowing through his body, admitting he can no longer control himself. Alicia runs to him, shouting and asking if he's okay. However, the protagonist turns and slaps her, throwing her hard against the wall. She falls, weakly calling his name, but his rage is focused solely on one being. The wise dragon gets up and says the protagonist absorbed an excessive amount of mana, becoming a full-fledged monster. That was intriguing, but he points out that Rudy won't last long, so maybe it's not even worth wasting time on him. The protagonist keeps growling in anger, feeling his body burn as if he's going insane. He knows he won't last. Suddenly, a voice emerges from the shadows. Mila appears and says the protagonist's mana control is completely disorganized, unleashing her aura and smiling. She says she's going to help and uses her touch ability. Instantly, Rudy begins to regain control over his mana. The rage and chaos he felt simply vanish, and now he feels the mana flowing in harmony with his body. Even the wise dragon is surprised by this. Mila takes a sword and hands it to him, saying now is his chance to finish off that lizard with one foot in the grave. Rudy looks at her, surprised, and asks who she really is. The wise dragon, enraged, asks if she really called him a lizard and said he was at death's door, emphasizing that she should not mock a god. Furious, he charges at Milam. She starts laughing, saying apparently the librarian dragon can't handle a simple joke. The protagonist steps in front of the dragon's attack and with a swift move, slices him in half effortlessly. Milam celebrates excitedly, shouting that he landed a fatal blow after the battle was already over. Everyone was injured, and Rudy began trying to heal them. He used his web manipulation for first aid, but the wounds were too deep. Milam looked at him and said only the two of them made it out unharmed, while the others were seriously wounded, and that if they didn't act quickly. Looking at everyone, she said it would be difficult to carry so many people out of there. So she asked what they should do, wondering if they should wait for reinforcements, carry everyone to the city, or look for help. Suddenly, the protagonist starts to feel something and screams in intense chest pain. Milam looked at him and said the side effects had finally appeared. She explained that she had controlled his mana to strengthen him, but his body was already at its limit. Suddenly, the wise dragon began cursing, surprising them both. He said he wouldn't let them leave unscathed, that he'd at least take everyone with him, and began bleeding from his eyes. A loud noise was heard, and the entire place began to shake. The protagonist looked up and asked if the dungeon was really collapsing. Milim also looked up and said the dragon was acting as a replacement for the dungeon core. She screamed that they needed to get out of there immediately. However, the protagonist noticed something and saw that a giant rock was about to hit Alicia. He ran, trying to reach her, shouting her name. Then a loud crash was heard, and a thick cloud of dust began to spread. Rudy sighed in relief with Alicia in his arms. She began to wake up, and, with a weak voice, called his name. He said he managed to defeat the wise dragon, and that now they just needed to escape the dungeon. Alicia tried to say she understood, but could barely speak due to coughing. Rudy grew worried and asked if she was alright. Gasping, she said she couldn't move because she had run out of mana. Realizing there was no other option, she lowered her eyes and asked the protagonist to leave her there and run. The protagonist criticized her decision, asking what kind of nonsense that was, and began to think that all of it was his fault. Milim turned to them and shouted that if they didn't hurry, they would be buried alive. The protagonist shouted back, saying he couldn't just run away, because those who break the rules are trash, but those who abandon their friends are worse than trash. Milim looked at him and began walking away, saying she liked him, but he had made the wrong choice. The protagonist couldn't believe what he was seeing and thought that if things kept going like this, they really would be buried alive. Then he had to make a hard decision, carry only the elf, and get out of there, but he couldn't do it. He thought about the people who helped and gave their lives for that mission, and asked himself if he really should abandon them. Rudy refused to do it and started wondering if there was another way, a way to save everyone. Alicia began to speak again, begging him to run. The protagonist got irritated and asked why she was saying that again. She screamed, telling him to run immediately, and with tears in her eyes, said that was what their companions wanted. That left the protagonist speechless and shocked. The old man also began to rise and told the protagonist to run. The guild master explained that if he wanted to keep living the adventurer's life, there would be many times he would lose his companions. Landcast also started shouting, asking if those who could survive wouldn't do so. What value would the lives of the dead have then? Once again, the protagonist was speechless. In the middle of all the chaos, monsters began to appear, and the protagonist, without hesitation, drew his sword. Several monsters began to surround the exit. Albert managed to stand up too and surprised the protagonist, saying that the dungeon's monsters were gathering there. Seeing that his companions were fighting for their lives or protecting someone, he decided he wouldn't let anyone die. No one would die there. He positioned himself in front of the monsters, but Alicia kept screaming for him to run. One of the monsters attacked, but he cut it down without hesitation and shouted, with hatred in his heart, that he wouldn't run because they had always called him a lamb and always looked down on him. He told Alicia that when she invited him to join her team and accepted his secret, those were the moments he felt the happiest in his life. That left her stunned with tears in her eyes. The protagonist kept talking and shouted that when the guild accepted him, that too was one of the happiest moments in his life. Now that he finally had companions who trusted him, now that he had everyone's recognition, he couldn't just abandon them and run. He kept fighting with all his strength and remembered his past, the great adventurer who saved him as a child. The adventurer's words echoed in his mind. Listen closely, kid. No matter how hard or painful it is, never. Rudy kept fighting, destroying every monster around him, while shouting that he would never give up. Alicia was moved upon hearing all that, but felt an overwhelming presence. Habert looked forward and asked, "Is that him?" The wise dragon was standing once again, using the dungeon's monsters to heal his body. The protagonist kept shouting that he wouldn't give up. The dragon let out a ferocious roar toward him and tried to attack, but Rudy managed to dodge and prepared to counterattack. However, the dragon opened its mouth, and its tongue turned into another mouth that lunged at the protagonist, biting his arm and making his sword fall. Alicia began screaming in despair when she saw the situation, but all the protagonist could think was that he would not give up. He used his high slash ability and left his own arm behind. Falling to the ground, he quickly got back up, picked up his sword, thinking he wouldn't give up, and used his regeneration ability, instantly creating a new arm. He gripped his sword tightly, surprising even the wise dragon, and attacked with all his strength, shouting until he managed to land a blow. With the sword embedded in the dragon's body, the MC activated his Thunder Cloak ability, causing a massive shock. The protagonist thought that now the monster would fall, that it couldn't take any more, but the dragon remained standing and began repeating the word annihilate over and over. With one of its claws, it struck the prota, launching him far away. However, someone caught him. As Rudy looked up, he was stunned. It was the same man, the great adventurer, the hero from his childhood, right in front of his eyes, telling him he had done a good job. With a smile on his face, he told the MC to relax. Since everyone there would make it out alive, the mysterious adventurer looked at the wise dragon and said it had failed in reincarnating and ended up parasitized by other monsters. What a shame. The dragon grew furious upon hearing that and began using his ability, making roots erupt to trap them. Rudy watched and thought this was bad, but with a single move, the hero cut down all the roots. The dragon lunged to try and punch, but the adventurer effortlessly matched its strength. The adventurer called the dragon by name, Orphus, and asked if he remembered him from their life or death battle 5 years ago. He explained that in the divine form the dragon once possessed, he had pushed his team to the limit, but now, looking at the present, it was clear how far he'd fallen. Orphus, enraged, shouted at the adventurer to shut up while releasing his aura. In a single second, the adventurer sliced the dragon in half, leaving the protagonist in awe at how incredible he was. The adventurer continued cutting down all the monsters that had come with the dragon, and Rudy just watched, thinking that this was the strength of an S-rank adventurer. The dungeon kept collapsing and the mimic looked back, seeing that Alicia was in danger. He shouted, trying to help her, but she was out of reach. Suddenly, another adventurer appeared and used her ability, Frozen Hell, freezing everything around and protecting Alicia. She looked around and asked where all that ice had come from, as it was enough to stop the dungeon from collapsing. The ice adventurer asked what kind of bizarre monster that was, saying everything there was disgusting. The mysterious adventurer thanked Selena for the help, but she didn't care and started arguing with Leonis, saying he was still reckless for charging in like that. The protagonist was confused by the arrival of these people, and more adventurers kept coming in. Another group member said he couldn't agree more with Selena. Suddenly, she looked to the side and saw Rude and Alicia kneeling on the ground. She rushed over to Alicia and greeted her, saying it had been a while since they last met. Selena looked at the elf and said her condition was terrible. She shouted for the healer to hurry and heal everyone. The healer got ready and began using his holy light ability to heal. He spread the light throughout the dungeon, and the wounded adventurers began saying that all their pain was disappearing. Ebert was impressed by the wide range of the healing. The healer approached Ramon and realized his condition was slightly worse than the others. Nonetheless, he reached out and began using Soul Seal Restoration. Ramon, who had been groaning in pain, now managed to sleep peacefully. The healer stood up saying that he had healed everyone who was injured. They were still drained, so he asked everyone to rest. He looked to the side and said that unfortunately, he couldn't revive those who had already lost their souls. Leonis smiled and said it was now time to get out of that place. He told the adventurers who couldn't walk to lean on someone, and everyone began helping each other. Rude smiled and helped his partner walk. She smiled too and nodded to him. When he looked to the side, he saw the remains of the wise dragon lying on the ground. Taking advantage of everything being frozen, Leonis said that now everyone would go home. Some time later, outside the dungeon, they set up camp and lit a fire. Leonis held an orb in his hands and explained that it was a fragment of the dragon's soul core and that it should recover after a few years and then re-emerge. Leonis also said that they, from the group Lion Wings of Light, had already defeated that dragon 5 years ago, and the collected soul had been kept safe in the capital. Landkars heard the story and asked why the dragon had resurfaced in such a remote city like Polona. The adventurer explained that the royal vault had recently been robbed by someone, which had alarmed the old man. Leonis stated that the dragon's resurrection this time was thanks to an artificial dungeon anomaly created by someone. Landkars was shocked to hear that, not knowing what to say. Meanwhile, Selena and the elf were talking. She said that if Alicia had joined her group, they would have been equivalent to an army. The elf was very happy to hear that, but said her level had decreased and now her goals were different. That battle in the dungeon made her realize how weak she still was. Selena didn't completely agree and just observed. Rude was also watching from a distance, not agreeing with what he heard, but said nothing. Selena began to laugh and said Alicia had always been like that. She never changed her mind after making a decision. The elf smiled and thanked her for the intention and also for the invitation. Selena asked the elf to look at the members of her team and shouted that they had a selfish leader, a muscle brain who said nothing, and a 2-meter nerd. She started complaining, saying there were only men on the team and that it annoyed her. Leonis approached and asked her to be quiet for a moment because she was making Alicia's partner uncomfortable with all that. The MC said nothing, just looked at his hero. He gathered courage, stood up, walked toward everyone, and looked directly at Leonis, starting to say that when he was a child, something happened in a village to the east, emphasizing that the adventurer had saved his life. Rue began shouting that maybe Leonis didn't remember, but that day he became his hero. Leonis lowered his head and said he understood, and it seemed like he really was that boy. With a smile on his face, he looked at the protagonist and asked if he had never given up. Selena was surprised to learn that the MC was that boy and commented that they might have saved more villagers if they had arrived earlier. However, Leonis still regrets that to this day. The healer explained that this is why their leader is so important now and that, because of that, he also became a problem for the team. Leonis extended his hand and told the protagonist that it was thanks to him the damage from the dungeon anomaly had been minimized, emphasizing that he had become a great adventurer. They shook hands and Rude said he didn't deserve such praise, but thanked him. Landcast interrupted them and called them Mick. He explained that, given the recent turmoil in the capital, and considering that Bologna needed to strengthen its defenses, he was thinking of creating a new guard unit. The guild master said he would like the protagonist to be the captain of that team and asked what he thought. Rude was so shocked he didn't know what to say. Leonis was surprised by the proposal, while Selena just smiled, watching everything. Alicia was also surprised to hear that. The MC thanked him for the offer, but said he would have to decline. Landcast looked at him, not expecting that response, but said he understood and would respect his decision. He asked why he was refusing. Rude lowered his gaze and said that during the operation to conquer that dungeon, he realized how unprepared he was. In the end, he was the only one left standing, and even so it wasn't enough. He began clenching his fists in anger and said that without strength, he couldn't protect his companions. Alicia watched in silence until the protagonist shouted, calling Leonis. He said he became an adventurer because he admired the kind of adventurer Leonis was. The MC emphasized that he knew he was still far from reaching the level Leonis had, but with conviction and an absurd will, he shouted that he would definitely become stronger, and that one day they would fight together. He turned to the elf and promised they would also conquer the abyssal dungeon. She smiled and gave his hands a light pat, saying she couldn't wait for that moment, calling him her partner. Landcast sighed and said that apparently, those two already had their own goals. Rude explained that he planned to leave Bologna and begin a journey to further evolve his power. The healer suddenly appeared behind him and said that was fascinating. The protagonist was startled, but the healer stated that the energy he possessed was different from conventional magic. It was magical essence. A magical essence taking root in a human body should be impossible. He kept looking at the prota's face and asked if he had been eating monsters. After that, everyone on the team was shocked and Selena screamed for everyone to get away because the protagonist might be dangerous. Immediately, she created ice crystals and pointed them at Rude. She kept shouting, demanding he answer and confirm if what the healer said was true. She brought the crystals close to the prota's head and said that depending on the answer, the healer began getting nervous and used his powers to control the roots, making several sprout around Selena, trapping her. She starts grumbling and he asks her to calm down a little. She manages to pull her head out and yells, asking why he's doing this, saying that as a brother, he's the biggest idiot of all, stressing that the MC is not trustworthy. The healer smiles and says that the protagonist seems special, as he sees no signs of monsterification in him. To be clearer, he emphasizes that there's no sign of darkness in the prota's essence. He just doesn't know why yet. Leonis, as the leader, introduces himself to the prota, apologizing for Selena's rude behavior. He explains that their group is still chasing the thieves who stole the royal vault, and based on the residual magical essence left at the scene, they suspect that monsters are somehow involved. So he asks the protagonist to explain the entire situation. Some time later, after Rude finishes telling his story, Leonis says he understands and now knows how the Meek survived the poison, since status nullification is a rare ability. The healer agrees, noting that it's the first time he's heard of such an ability, but now everything makes sense. Selena feels upset, sitting beside the elf, as she realizes how the protagonist dispelled the abyssal curse that was killing Alicia. And even so, she had helped him that way? Rude says it's fine and that he understands her reaction. The healer approaches the protagonist again and says that when he eats monster meat, he can replicate their abilities. However, on the other hand, when he eats fish monster meat, he still can't breathe underwater, which leaves him thoughtful. Leonis reflects as well, since the protagonist can absorb monsters' abilities, but not their physical traits. The leader asks the elf if she has ever eaten a monster with the prota. She thinks for a moment and remembers all the times she drooled watching him eat, but answers that no, she never thought about it. Leonis keeps thinking and says that maybe someone other than the prota, if they ate a monster and absorbed its essence, could also gain its abilities. Alicia, shocked by the thought, asks what he's talking about, since eating monsters is considered taboo. She questions what would happen if she ate one too and ended up transforming. The leader says that if that happened, they could simply use substitution to possibly reverse the transformation. Everyone is surprised, including her, as she had never thought of that. The MC approaches him and says that's not possible, as there are only two outcomes for those who eat monsters. Either the person turns into a monster, or they meet their end. The healer understands and comments that instead of turning directly into a monster, the person might just die. Rude explains that the first time he ate a monster, he felt a wave of mana in his body, which made him completely lose control. At that time, he was driven by an intense desire for revenge against the one who betrayed him. And that's how he managed to keep going. Only now are the side effects of absorbing mana beginning to fade. Once again, the healer observes the prota, saying his body is adapting to that magical essence. Rude also explains that there was a time when substitution failed. Leonis seems a bit uncomfortable but says he understands, stressing that there's still much to learn about mana. The healer agrees, saying this isn't something to mess around with. Leonis watches Rude in silence for a while until he gets an idea and asks the protagonist if he could show his abilities. He starts grabbing his sword and says that it's understandable, but there's still a lot about mana they don't understand, and if they really want to understand, they should talk using their swords. After all, they're adventurers. In the middle of the forest, sounds are heard, and even the unicorn rabbits stop because of the noise. Suddenly, they get startled when Leonis, along with his companion, appears right in front of them. The unicorn rabbits just stare at the two, already knowing what's going to happen. Shortly after, the protagonist had already prepared grilled unicorns with larvae and happily says it's time to eat. After tasting it, he observes that it's delicious and automatically gains the ability Rabbit Leap. Selena watches him and says that's a little unfair. She and the elf are drooling from hunger. Selena continues saying they need to use items or rest to recover magic. Alicia agrees with her and comments that it's really convenient to recover mana by eating. After finishing the meal, the MC snaps his fingers, excited, saying he's ready now, as he just recovered all his energy, and thanks them for the food. Leonis asks if he's really okay after eating all that, but the protagonist tells him not to worry and emphasizes that, actually, he's better than ever. Suddenly, in the darkness, the healer opens a portal. That is the secret garden, and it transports them to a space filled with plant essence. This space does not allow interference and can only be accessed when the user allows it. The healer informs them that they may enter now. Upon entering, the MC is impressed by what he sees, as there's a whole beautiful world on the other side. The healer says no one will disturb them. He uses a flame skill and shows that the ground remained intact even after the impact, highlighting that they can go all out. Leonis takes off his cape and begins to release his aura, saying it's time to begin. He points his sword at the prota, asking him not to hold anything back. Protagonist hesitates for a moment and starts the battle using the skill Morpha Cut. Leonis laughs, saying he already started with a Morpha skill and is happy to see that Rude can actually use monster abilities. He defends easily, but Protagonist keeps advancing. This time, he uses his spider web ability. Leonis cuts through everything effortlessly and asks if that's all Protagonist has. But suddenly, Rude uses another skill and vanishes from in front of him, leaving him a bit confused. Leonis looks at his hand and wonders if that was a paralyzing breath. Suddenly, MC appears behind the adventurer. Leonis turns and defends the attack again, saying that Protagonist is still too young and that with such half-baked techniques, he won't even manage to scratch him. The two rush at each other and begin exchanging several blows. While they trade frantic attacks, Leonis tells MC that relying too much on his skills is weakening his strikes. Rude starts feeling pressured and asks if the paralysis didn't work. Leonis replies that it didn't, explaining that high-level adventurers like him have very high resistance. The adventurer lands a slightly stronger blow, throwing Protagonist off balance. Rude, realizing he's about to take a direct hit, uses his hardening ability. Even so, the impact is so strong that he's sent flying. Leonis explains that many monsters have resistance to negative effects, and that Protagonist can't depend too much on his abilities. Rude hears this but gets irritated and uses another ability called Instant Step, charging at his opponent with all his strength. Leonis watches and with a simple kick, sends Protagonist flying again. On the ground, he becomes frustrated. Leonis notices that Mick is channeling his mana into the sword and charges again, this time using the Rabbit Leap. Leonis gets excited and comments that this is the ability Protagonist gained from what he ate earlier, highlighting that he's truly skilled. Protagonist focuses all his strength into one attack, creating a huge explosion, surprising even the healer who was just watching. As the dust begins to clear, Leonis is standing, having dodged the attack as if it were nothing. He places his sword beside Prota's face and says it'll be impossible to hit him with such spaced-out attacks. Besides that, even though monster abilities are powerful, Rude's combat skills are still weak. He points out that the last attack might work well against giant monsters, but in a fight against another human, it would be hard to land a blow like that. He extends his hand to help Rude up. Rude takes his hero's hand, saying he understood the lesson. Leonis asks Simic if he's ever heard of that technique, showing his hand with a bit of energy. The adventurer explains that it's the circulation of energy throughout the body, which boosts physical abilities. As soon as Rude hears that, he immediately recalls what happened during his fight against the wise dragon and begins to remember the exact sensation. His hand starts to be enveloped by energy, and he focuses a bit more. Leonis starts to smile, satisfied with what he's seeing, as Protagonist learns very quickly. Rude is now completely surrounded by magic and, excited, asks to fight again. Leonis is also very excited and laughs, shouting that for him there are only 2 times to fight, day and night. He tells Protagonist to come at him with everything once more, The healer just watches and laughs, seeing that the two are having fun. Sometime later at the camp, Alicia sees that the portal is opening again and that the two are coming out. Protagonist is tired and panting, saying that it was expected from a rank S, since he couldn't land a single punch on his relative. Leonis pats him on the shoulders, saying that with his skills and versatility, Protagonist managed to pressure him several times. Rude gets even more excited and thanks the adventurer, shouting enthusiastically, because during the fight Leonis pointed out his weaknesses and bad habits, meaning he was being trained. Leonis seems a little confused and just reflects on it. The big guy comments that it was nothing serious and says it's just their leader acting weird again. Leonis looks at him and says he doesn't remember saying anything unusual. The protagonist thinks it's the first time he's heard that pile of muscles talk. While they're chatting, the healer calls Rude and asks him not to tell anyone about his ability to eat monsters, because if the royal capital finds out, he'll be executed. This shocks him. The healer goes on to explain that the closer you get to the capital, the stronger the church's influence, and to them, the Holy Scripture is an object of worship. In it, it's written that eating monsters is the greatest taboo of all. Rude tries to argue, saying his ability nullifies the effects, but the healer steps closer and says that even so, going against the Holy Scriptures is already a sin. Selena joins the conversation and points out that those self-righteous clerics would never understand his side. The healer continues and asks if anyone other than the adventurers who were in that dungeon knows this secret. The protagonist says no, because it's a taboo. He explains that's why he kept it secret all this time and only told his partner, Alicia. However, he remembers that Dome also knows, since he told him everything that happened so the blacksmith could forge a sword. Immediately, they head back to Bologna and go to the dwarf's shop. When the dwarf hears the story, he says he doesn't care and that taboo or not, what others eat isn't his business. He tells Rude and the elf to relax, saying he won't tell anyone, but suddenly the dwarf becomes serious and says there's something more important. With a heavy aura and extremely irritated, he says that Rude asked for a sword and now says he doesn't need it anymore. The MC realizes he made a mistake and immediately bows, apologizing for the request. Doan looks at his masterpiece and says he created a sword that wouldn't break even with channeled mana after completing such a difficult task. After finishing, the protagonist and the elf stay there, watching the dwarf, knowing he's furious. She agrees, saying that's obvious. The blacksmith asks if Rude can do him a favor, and feeling guilty, Rude says he'll do anything. Doan turns around, embarrassed, and asks if the MC can touch his sword. Rude looks a little confused but says he can't, explaining that the sword is cursed and makes whoever uses it go insane. The dwarf says he didn't complain when the protagonist ignored his work, so he better listen to the request since he said he'd do anything. Besides, the blacksmith says he heard that the protagonist can cure negative effects in others. Rude is shocked and yells that it's too dangerous, because if the dwarf loses consciousness, substitution might not work. Doem says he doesn't care and that if it doesn't work, they can just cut him in half. Madness. But after thinking for a moment, Rude takes the sword, saying that since the blacksmith is that determined. Alicia gets worried and asks the dwarf if he's really serious. Doem replies that in all his years as a blacksmith, he's never seen a weapon capable of absorbing magic or human energy like that, so the risk would be worth it, and he goes right for the sword. The old man is surprised by the sword, holding it in his slightly trembling hands. He says that iron wasn't normal, and the darkness within the blade felt like it was alive. And on top of that, it was beautiful. He notices the eye on the sword emanating energy and asks if it was really alive. Very tense, he says that someday he'll forge a sword like that. At that moment, he starts feeling something bad. It's as if the sword is telling him to eliminate the people around him. He starts to feel a chill as a sensation runs through his body. The curse contained in that sword is extremely powerful, and slowly he begins to see the creature behind that curse. The old man starts trembling hard because he had underestimated the power of that curse. At that moment, our hero ends up grabbing the sword from his hand and asks if the old man is alright. The old man says yes, he's totally fine, and apologizes for making such a selfish request. At the same time, he wonders what that illusion was, since he'd never seen anything like it. The two find Doan's reaction strange, but don't say anything. He wouldn't do anything to harm the kids, and says he'll try to forge a sword that surpasses this one. Later, they were traveling in a wagon. The MC comments that renting a horse just for the two of them was pretty bold, and the elf says that in recent years she had been hunted, so it was nice to relax a bit. He mentions that soon Self and Nomiya will probably get a carriage, and the girl says they could even hire someone to guide the horse. But that wouldn't be very good, since Rude's eating habits might be discovered, so it's better to travel just the two of them. As they approach the city of Ischia, they wonder what kind of place it is, since it's well known for its fishing and trade. The elf comments that going to Ischia would be great because they could obtain new abilities. Besides, the submerged temple is near that city and is feared for its many monsters, so Rude could devour those creatures and gain new powers, not to mention the boss King Scissor, who had a body similar to steel. She even imagines how strong he would get by absorbing a power like that, saying he'd have an armored body. On top of that, there was a second very important reason. They wanted to revive Erdiel, and he starts thinking about what had happened during the battle against that creature. The girl said that this submerged dungeon is the birthplace of Erdiel, and besides reviving her, they could also get stronger. He asks if she hadn't been devoured, and his companion says that spirits don't have physical forms. So basically, they would be able to restore her through the mana within the dungeon and recover the spirit's power. Not to mention, they could eat delicious food. Drooling, she says that Ischia is known for its delicious seafood. She asks him if August had given him anything when they left Bologna. What had been given to him was a book, and he ends up holding it in his hands. Then we see a flashback of him receiving that journal. August said it belonged to someone who had been researching the habit of eating monsters, and maybe it could be useful to our hero. Leonis approached him, saying it was time for the boy to shine, making Rude blush. The whole group was gathered in a moment of peace, and they were having a lot of fun too. That had happened after the battle. All those memories gave him a very good feeling, and he wished for many more adventures like that with his companions. Unfortunately, their company was short-lived, and back in the present, he was smiling while recalling those memories. The elf starts teasing our protagonist, asking if he was thinking about the adventures he had with Leonis. He keeps saying no and asks Alicia to stop messing with him. Right after that, a scream echoes through the forest. A woman had collapsed on the ground, extremely desperate. A man turns to her with a tense expression. He whispers very quietly, asking the woman to run while a very large creature stands in front of him. The monsters start getting closer, and she becomes paralyzed with fear. As the monsters approach, she feels there's no way to escape. It was a demon boar with relatively high stats. The scene shifts to the notes of the Count, who had made entries in the journal. There were instructions there on how to prepare monsters and create delicious recipes. He had written that slimes have a powerful acid, so they should not be consumed raw. To make them safe, it's best to cook the slimes to neutralize their acid and then stir-fry them in a pan. They could also be fried, but the oil splattered a lot. That's why he concluded the best method is to boil the slime in hot water and then add seasoning. And lastly, to finish the dish, slice a few small pieces to serve with salad. Rude was reading those recipes and even commented that that slime dish must taste delicious. And the girl asks if that journal was a monster recipe book, even saying that if so, it would be very useful. Our hero can't believe a book like that could exist, since eating monster meat is considered a taboo. Quite excitedly, she has an idea, saying that after visiting Ischia, they could go visit the Count. However, our hero says that wouldn't work, and she asks why. He hands her the book and she starts to analyze it. Gradually, her facial expression begins to change, and she starts to get discouraged by the information in the book. The elf had understood everything. No one but him could eat monster meat, because the skill he had allowed his body not to be poisoned by the mana of the creatures. As soon as they crossed the forest, they would arrive in the city of Ischia, and they were very excited. Our protagonist was listening to his friend telling some stories. She said that these forests were truly amazing. She asked if he had ever heard about the Calamity Dragon, a legendary creature. Now that she mentioned it, he ended up remembering some stories he had heard about it, which said it was powerful. When he was a child, people used to tell scary stories about this dragon, saying that if a child misbehaved, the dragon would come get them. The elf said that the forest was famous for being the home of this legendary dragon. Rude asked her if this dragon really existed, and she nodded, saying yes. The Calamity Dragon exists, and she had seen it from a distance in the past. With a terrified look, she said that its appearance was divine and something humans could never surpass. He kept thinking about it, because when he was a kid, people said this dragon hadn't appeared in a long time, yet Alicia had seen it. So he asked her how old she was, and the girl said it was rude to ask others that. At that moment, one of the spirits brought some news. She said that ahead there were 3 demon boars, but there was no way to go around the path, so they would have to defeat them to move forward. So they sneaked around to the rear of the boars. They were grabbing prey when they heard a noise. Before they could react, one of the demon boars was struck on the head. The explosion was strong, and it began to catch fire. Our protagonist was behind the other 2, and with a strike of his sword, he managed to finish them off with ease. The duo celebrated, saying they did really well, and that it was easier than they thought. However, they looked down and noticed the victims of those demons. The attack had been merciless, and that left them a bit shaken. The elf sighed, saying that abnormalities might be occurring because the predator of the boars, the dragon, had disappeared. With that, the boars started reproducing uncontrollably. He asked if that wasn't too dangerous. Wouldn't it be risky to leave such a large number of demons of the same species in a forest? After walking for a bit longer, they found tracks and sounds. Rude decided to use his heat vision to find where they were. With his power activated, he noticed there were around 40 to 50 of them, and even though their level was low, they were quite clever. Our protagonist even commented that the position they were in was perfect to avoid group battles. With that, he began to use his paralyzing breath. That poisonous gas started spreading across the boar camp, and all of them began inhaling the smoke. It was enough to leave their bodies paralyzed and unable to move. They'd all suffered the same way, frozen in place. He celebrated with his partner, saying now they just needed to go in and finish them off. But the girl had noticed something. Not all the boars had been affected by the magic. There were some that weren't paralyzed, and that seemed a bit strange. At that moment, MC remembered what Leonis had said about some monsters having resistance to specific status effects. One of the boars let out a loud roar, as if calling out to its companions. Right after, they all started eating a specific herb from the forest. The elf noticed that this was a herb that countered paralysis, and that's why they were all eating it, to relieve the symptoms. The paralysis status began fading as they ate the herb, and on top of that, they were gaining temporary resistance. The girl teased our hero, saying his paralyzing breath had failed, while he told her to be quiet. Within seconds, all the boars were already healthy again. They grabbed their weapons and charged toward the two. With a smile on his face, he said he was going to make bacon out of those piggies. And just like that, the battle was about to begin, with the boars charging in. Holding their weapons, they advanced without fear. The elf asked if she could clear the entire battlefield with her magic. Then our hero told Alicia that he wanted her to try something. And with that, he used poisonous scales, a technique he acquired from an insect demon. He figured that if he fought using that technique, he would have the advantage, and the girl said she couldn't stay too close to him, or she'd be affected too. Charging at the demons, he shouted that if paralysis didn't work, maybe poison would. Attacking the creatures, they began to fall one after another, and feeling very confident, he shouted that they could come at him. He wasn't going to back down. Every movement he made caused those poisonous scales to spread to the nearby monsters, and they became infected, further increasing the damage. Our protagonist even celebrates, saying those scales worked and were very effective. However, he hadn't noticed there was a boar behind him. The creature tried to strike him, but Rude dodged by jumping backward. That other boar who had shouted about the herbs now shouted again. It had gathered the other boars to surround our prota. With that, he realized that this boar had a command ability, so it had to be defeated first. The girl warned him to be careful and look up, and a gigantic rock was falling toward his head. He managed to dodge by jumping backward. Then he asked where that giant rock had come from. There were several other boars behind him throwing those stones. This creature was a bit different and seemed to be the Boar King. The elf said it was a monster that usually lived in the depths of a dungeon and shouldn't appear on the surface. Maybe it was due to the influence of the Calamity Dragon and the local magic had intensified, so they needed to stop them. The boars charged at the two with weapons in hand. He shouted at her to worry about protecting the forest later. They needed to deal with these creatures first. Alicia used her magic to hold back the monsters, but it wasn't easy. They needed to defeat the Boar King first, but in the meantime, the other demons kept trying to hit them. Rude shouted that he had no time to waste on that weakling boar, and ended up slicing it with his blades. That more powerful demon who was throwing the stones kept doing so. The stone he had launched was massive, and the protagonist knew he had to deal with it. Without thinking twice, he rushed toward that rock. His speed was impressive, and he managed to get past the rock and the other boars. His focus was on the king of those demons, and as soon as he was face to face with it, the beast charged. Our hero blocked with his blades, and we saw that the Boar King was very large. This would be harder than he thought, and after falling to the ground, he thought he needed another strategy. At that moment, he realized he was surrounded. Demons were on all sides, because now their boss was there. With a sly smile, he said this was great, since now he could finish all of them at once. He used the Miyama skin-shedding technique, letting out a loud scream. It even impressed the demons nearby, and all that power started pushing them back. The boar began to get worried. The creatures were launched far away, and the only one still standing was their leader. The demon was now afflicted by a miasma status and started sweating cold from fear. With a confident smile, he called the Boar Kingdom to step into battle. He had remembered everything he had learned. It was important to feel the sensation of cloaking the body with humana, and that's what he had done. The demon let out a roar and charged at our hero. Its weapon was massive, but Rude was channeling a huge amount of mana into his body. That was enough for him to stop the attack, and he even thanked Leonis for teaching him that technique. The boar couldn't believe that a mere human had stopped its attack, and before it could defend itself, it was defeated by an attack from our protagonist. All the training he had gone through resulted in this boost in strength. Alicia appeared, saying that was incredible because he had managed to defeat the Boar King with a single blow. The girl was a bit thrilled as she asked about the skill he had used. The boy confirmed, saying it was exactly the Miyama wave he had obtained from the dragon. But that technique had a flaw, and she asked what flaw that was. The big problem with using that ability was that it caused an enormous hunger, and his stomach began to growl, echoing throughout the forest. Right after that, he prepared a proper barbecue. He had used the notes contained in that journal to cook a delicious meal. At that moment, someone appeared, saying the food smelled amazing. The two were surprised by who had shown up. The red-haired girl asked if she could join them for the meal and even called Rude Sir Monster-Eating Adventurer. He asked what that girl was doing there. In response, she said that she liked him and that's why she was following him. She even asked if, back in Abelio's dungeon, he wasn't cooking monsters to eat, and she added that her mouth was watering, dying to try it since it looked so delicious. As she was about to put a piece of meat in her mouth, he asked her to wait, but she went ahead and tasted the meat anyway, seemingly enjoying the flavor a lot. The two of them started begging her to spit out that food because it could harm her. Rude held the girl's arms while the elf tried to force the food out of her mouth in an attempt to save her life. But the redhead didn't want to spit it out, even though they told her it was dangerous. She even said they were really annoying. Then suddenly, she let out a loud scream and threw them both away from her. She then asked how dare they touch her body like that. All they wanted was to save the girl's life, and asked what she meant by that. She said she barely got to enjoy that delicious meal because of them, but they thought she was starting to feel sick. That's because monster meat is toxic to others. It only doesn't affect our hero. They even shouted for her to be careful and said she needed healing. Rude even said he'd try using substitution on her and asked if she was turning into a monster, but the girl turned around and said that the food was delicious. She laughed a lot, leaving both of them totally confused. The elf asked if she was really okay, and in response, she said it was delicious and she could still taste the mana and the ingredients. She really did seem normal, and that was very curious. The poor elf was drooling because she couldn't eat that, and the redhead even teased her, saying that maybe it sounded selfish, but the elf couldn't eat that. She asked the girl if she knew what happens to humans when they eat monster meat. Alicia asked why she was eating it then, and the girl replied that only humans can't eat it. But she wasn't human, she was a monster. That was quite shocking to them, and our hero asked her again if she was a monster, and she confirmed it, saying yes. So he used his analysis ability. The status window said that Alumuro was of the human race. Then he asked her if she was really a monster, since his analysis showed she was just a normal human. She said she forgot to undo her disguise and told him to check again. After performing another analysis, he was shocked. He ended up shouting loudly for Alicia to get away from that girl. The elf didn't understand anything, asking what had happened, and he was clearly terrified. That girl was the Calamity Dragon, and now the analysis was clearly showing her race type and name. The elf couldn't believe it, saying there was no way. Meanwhile, the redhead kept munching on the monster meat, saying it was really good. With a sigh, our hero asked what her goal was, and the girl said for him to calm down. She wasn't going to devour him. Alicia wanted to know why such a high-ranking being like her had decided to disguise herself as a human and act this way. In response, the dragon said there wasn't a particular reason. She was just curious about Rude's mana. And to her surprise, he was a monster eater, and that caught her attention. She had been captivated by the monster food he made and couldn't help but follow him. Both of them looked at each other, wondering if they should trust her. The girl said there was a demon boar den nearby, and that it would be interesting for them to go there. She also mentioned that ever since she left the forest, they had started reproducing even more. She recognized the taste of that meat, saying it was from the boars, but the seasoning had made it much more flavorful. Standing up, full of excitement, she said it was time for them to hunt the demon boar chief. They asked how she had eaten so fast, and the dragon told them to wait just a moment for her. The elf asked her to hold on and said it would be better if they all went together. It seemed the dragon wasn't lying and that she really wanted to see the chief fight to learn more. The redhead smiled, thinking it was quite interesting, and she ended up agreeing to take them. Moments later, they were walking through the forest. Our hero comments that she seems more relaxed, and she says it's because she revealed her true identity and no longer needs to keep pretending. They were already almost at the boar's den, and just ahead, there was a dense forest area. With a predator's gaze, she says it's time to show why she's called the Calamity Dragon.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.